happiness is, you've got to pay for it on the other end on some level, or it's like a spike, and there's all sorts of chemical stuff at work. But peace has no opposite, right? Like peace is just like, I'm here. Everything that comes my way, I can accept. I'm of service. There's a calmer dimension to it.
Katie, let it out with Katie. Let it out with Katie Dalebout, enthusiast and curator of people and ideas you need to hear. Hi, you're listening to Let It Out with me, your host, Katie Dalebout. And if you're new, every Wednesday I release an episode with a guest where we do just that. We let it out, all of our thoughts and feelings and what's inspiring us. And I ask a lot of questions because I'm a very curious person, and I capture in this very long-winded recorded conversation a moment in time and a long conversation with someone, which I love doing more than anything else. And you just heard a quote from my conversation with Josh Radnor, who is the guest on today's podcast, and I am so thrilled for you to hear it. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you have probably heard me mention Josh and his work because it's super meaningful to me, which is why this episode is super exciting for me and hopefully you in a few minutes when I finally get to it. He's an actor. You probably know him from the TV show that he starred in for 9 years, How I Met Your Mother, where he played Ted Mosby, which is the guy who's trying to find the mother. And Josh isn't exclusively an actor. He is also a writer and a director. And he's made 2 of my favorite movies. His first movie, Happy Thank You More Please, which he wrote, directs, and stars in, is maybe one of my favorite movies ever. It's my comfort movie. I can watch it on repeat. I'm constantly recommending it to people. I even wrote about it in my book, which is about journaling. It's called Let It Out. And one of the journaling tools in my book was inspired by a monologue in that film, which is how I was able to connect with Josh. And anyway, check it out if you haven't seen it. It's kind of a joke at this point how I'm become the ambassador for this movie, and we even joke about it in this episode, but I'm going to keep recommending it forever because I love it. So definitely watch it if you haven't already. His second movie, which we also talk about in this conversation, is called Liberal Arts, and it stars, again, Josh. He wrote it, he directed it, he was in it along with Elizabeth Olsen. And this one's on Netflix, so you have no excuse not to watch this one. It's right at your fingertips, and it's so uplifting and relatable and, above all, entertaining. So you'll hear us discuss both of these, and good news, Josh also mentions in this episode that he has 2 movies at the ready that he's working on. He's also working on a book. He's starring in this PBS period show that comes on after Downton Abbey called Mercy Street about the Civil War. He's about to be in a Broadway play this fall, and he's working on an album with Ben Lee. So clearly, he's a productive guy and a busy guy. So I am super grateful that he spent almost 3 hours chatting with me about everything from acting to finding yourself in your 20s to going really deep about spirituality and his writing process and what he likes to eat. So it's such a tangential, amazing conversation. He couldn't have been nicer, and I'm so grateful that he did this podcast and gave me the opportunity to share this conversation with all of you. And I'm so grateful to the podcast for giving me the opportunity to get to have a conversation with someone I admire so much. So thank you guys so much for listening this week and every week. And I know you're going to get so much from this conversation. I just re-listened to it right now, and even though I recorded it just a couple months ago, I got so many new lessons from the wise anecdotes that he shared, and I took away something completely different, not because it had changed, but because I had. And we talk about that. We talk about changing and transitioning, especially as you're growing up in this episode quite a bit, which is good. It's good that I've changed, and it's good that we're constantly changing. Josh said once that stagnation is really the only thing to fear. So listen, I'm going to get us right into this episode because I'm beyond excited for you to hear this, but please note that I was a little bit nervous before I was recording this. A lot nervous maybe, but then I started to talk to Josh on the phone and I completely relaxed. I calmed down. Everything was good. I felt like I was just chatting with a friend that I knew really well. But then, about an hour into the conversation, I started to get anxious again because I realized it went by so fast that I had been recording for an hour and I didn't know how long I had him and I had so many questions I wanted to ask. But luckily, I had plenty of time. He stayed almost 3 hours and let me ask all the questions I wanted to ask, although I probably could have asked more. Anyway, so you have a very tangential conversation ahead of you, which spans through a bunch of topics. And in the middle, he reads this quote from a Holocaust survivor, which he said I could edit out because it was long and dense, which it was. But I, of course, kept it in because I really liked it. And I think you will too. So I kept this conversation completely unedited, long form, and I hope you like it. I really think that you will. I loved it. All right. Oh, and I almost forgot about all the announcement stuff. So if you like this episode, if you like this podcast, and you want to help me to be able to keep doing it, it would be so great if you supported the show. There's a multitude of ways you can support the show, and the first one doesn't cost any money at all and really doesn't take much time, but just tell a friend about it. It would be so cool if you could send this episode or another episode that you like to a friend that you think it would help or you think they would find it interesting, or give them something for their long commute. That would be really nice of you, and it's really nice in general because it helps the show grow. Another way is you can leave a review on iTunes. It helps a ton, and shout out to everyone who's left a review so far. They're so nice. Thank you. And also subscribing to the show on iTunes. Oh, and if you are leaving a review, I just found out you can leave reviews on your phone. You don't even have to fire up the laptop, which is wonderful. So do that, and also you can subscribe on whatever device you listen to. That's just like giving the show a high five when you press that button. And I'm so grateful to everyone who subscribed. This show is one of it is the favorite thing that I do in my life. I've met so many real life friends that have become people in my life I'm so grateful for as a result of these conversations that I get to have. So I want to be able to keep having them. So thank you for supporting it. And feel free to use the Amazon link. That's another way you can support the show. It doesn't cost you anything extra, but Amazon throws a couple pennies my way. And again, you know Amazon. You love Amazon. That's an easy way to support the show. You can also sign up for my newsletter, which I've completely switched up the way I'm sending those out recently. I'm sending out these really personal notes of what's happening with me in real time and what's inspiring me and what I'm learning in real time, which, speaking of, you will also really like the newsletter, the Muse-letter. That's what Josh is calling his. And he sends out this Muse-letter every so often, and it's fantastic. You must sign up for it. If you like this episode and the things we talk about, you will love the newsletter that he sends out. I'll put the link where you can sign up for that in the show notes, as long as a bunch of the other things that we talk about. But anyway, sign up for the newsletter. Last week, I talked about my relationship with exercise and how that's grown and changed. And I mentioned my best friend Amanda's new program that she's making, that we're shooting the videos in my apartment. And it's really cool. So if you want to sign up for that, the link for that will be in the show notes. And that's all I have to say. That was a lot of announcements. This was a very long intro for a very long episode. But you know what? This is a dream come true episode. I really wanted to have Josh on my podcast. It happened. Here he is. Enjoy my conversation with Josh Radnor. Well, I'm so excited that you're here, and this is going to be so much fun. Like I said, I love your work, and I'm so excited to be able to have this tangential conversation, and it's been a really great couple of days preparing for this because I was like, I want to listen to him on every other podcast that you've ever been on, so I don't ask the same questions over and over, and it was just cool to spend time with you over the last couple of days.
That's so lovely to hear.
And I was listening to you on Marin and on Pete Holmes, who I know we both really love his show, and I was like, man, like I want to just have a really organic conversation like they do, but at the same time I have so many things I want to talk to you about, and I have these like copious notes I took that I want to ask you about stuff too.
Yeah, so lead the way. I mean, I'm sure it'll unspool as it's supposed to.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. So the one thing that I know we have in common is that, and really a reason like I love hosting the podcast, is that I can just go deep with people right away the first time I ever speak to them, because other people are apparently listening, which is like the reason I host the podcast. But I would love to know what you're learning right now and what you're most passionate about today. I figure we could start in the present.
Oh man. Yeah, I guess what you're saying is this gives you an opportunity to avoid small talk, which is something that I also feel is I get a little bored with like, where are you from? You have sisters? I mean, those are all interesting questions, but I like kind of diving in. So why don't we do that?
The podcast is a good excuse.
Yeah, exactly. What am I learning lately? Well, there's so much. I think I'm learning a lot about forgiveness, about mostly self-forgiveness, I would say, and patience. I feel like I'm always getting deep lessons in patience, and I think it's like one of the most annoying virtues to get lessons in, but it's also like the most kind of fruitful. I think someone said, patience is a bitter virtue, but its fruits are sweet. So I feel I'm being a little cryptic, but I without going into too much detail, I feel I'm getting massive lessons in that, and also kind of just being my own, like listening to that GPS that's internal rather than being swayed by. I'm having a situation where two sides are kind of whispering in my ear about something that might have happened that doesn't directly involve me, but it kind of does, and just kind of really trying to sit still and not make any sudden moves in any direction. And what's the difference between being patient with yourself and not making any sudden moves, and also not being spineless.
Right.
So yeah, and I suppose I finished this book by Richard Rohr, who was on Pete's podcast.
Yeah,
Did you hear him on
that?
that?
Yeah, I loved that.
It's wonderful. He has this book called Falling Upwards, and it's so terrific. I really recommend it. But I just finished it, and it's all about, he calls it the spirituality for the two halves of life, and the first half is all about we're what's called the loyal soldier, where we're dutiful and rule following and bound in by strictures and structures and doing all this stuff because we're kind of told, and we're wanting to be good sons and daughters and all this stuff. And the second half of life is a welcoming in of paradox, that things can be one thing can be true, and another thing can also be true that seems like it's the opposite. Or and this is something that really struck me, is like a sense that there's a deeply tragic dimension to life, that you've experienced some deep sadness, but at the same time there's this hum of okayness underneath it all, that you're okay, and that other people will be okay. That's another kind of paradoxical thing to hold. And just basically what he's talking about is the second half of life is where you become an elder. So I feel like I'm being encouraged on some level to let go, as always, of like certain childish preoccupations, and step into the very, very first footsteps onto like eldership, or because I think that's something that's missing in our society, is this sense that there are older people who have some genuine wisdom, and they can act as tempering influences on some of the madness we see around us. Because it's a hard time right now. I'm sure you're feeling that. Like, it doesn't, no amount of kind of heroic optimism can take away the headlines that are like really ghastly. So like, how do we not be Pollyannas in our optimism, but how do we have like a hard-earned, non-cynical kind of forward momentum that we stay with?
Yeah, and I think I know for me, and I feel like a kindred spirit with you, and that you might be the same way, but I'm a big overthinker, and I have to really, I think it serves me in some ways, but in other ways it can be, in that situation that you were talking about, it must be challenging with those two sides of things. But that quote that what you were mentioning about Richard Rohr, of the fact that two things can be true at the same time, I find that so comforting for that type of a mind.
Yeah, it's that Fitzgerald thing about, the mark of a first-rate intelligence is to be able to hold two contrasting ideas without losing your mind, or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. I haven't read his book yet, but I'm really excited to read Richard Rohr's book now that you recommended it. It's been
it's
on my
really
list for a while.
I'm really taken with him. I would love to talk with him. I just feel like he's so not a reactionary demagogue kind of, he's like I feel like those kinds of people are kind of a much needed antidote to what's going on right now, which is this kind of partisan rancor, and this, all the nativism and nationalism, and drawing up camps, and hating everyone who disagrees with us. I mean, it's really, what you're seeing really there in Richard Rohr's parlance is like, that's first half of life stuff kind of run amok, and we don't have enough of the, like I said, like that tempering influence. So I just think he's for me right now, that was a very healing book to read.
Yeah. I think it's timely and sounds comforting in a lot of ways. Yeah. Do you know Caroline Myss and her book about archetypes?
I've come across her. I haven't read a full book of hers, but I might have like given one as a gift to someone.
Well, it just made me think of it a little bit when you were talking about the elder conversation, because she has these different archetypes, and there's kind of like not really like a personality test, but different quizzes sort of within the book when you just kind of read it, and it kind of reminded me of that elder, that mentor personality, and how that can change, over time, and like the different wisdom that you must accumulate as you grow up. And that's a theme that I wrote down to actually talk to you about anyway, with that comes up in liberal arts, about never fully feeling like an adult, never feeling like you're more than 19. And right. I know that, I feel that way now, and I felt, and I'm 26 and I still feel like I'm 19, and I've talked about that so many times with other people, and everybody rings true to that line. I think it was so great that it was in the movie. Do you still find that true now? Why do you think adulthood is this kind of myth that we have, and we cling to this time in our lives where we were more unmolded clay that could go into any direction, and we like look at that with such nostalgia? Yeah.
Well, I think there's a couple of things. It's funny when I talk to my friends. I don't have kids, but I have a lot of friends who have kids, and once they have kids, they realize like very quickly that their parents had no idea what they were doing. They were just winging it, just like they're winging it. And when you're a kid, obviously, it's like these people are 3 times your size. They're giving you food and shelter, and they're gods to you. And you assume they actually know what they're doing, but the truth is, like, we don't. And if we don't, gather some wisdom along the way from elders and from, wisdom traditions, I think we do ourselves a real disservice. It's like there is people in human history have cracked some like great truths and laws, like they just have, and they're available to us, but they seem to be forgotten in every generation. Like every generation has to go through the growing pains of learning them. And maybe it has something to do with the fact that we don't learn unless we experience something. Like we can't, college is really interesting because you get packed with information. Some of it is really high level stuff that is usable, but you don't know what it is until you finally have to start putting it into action, you know? Wait, I've lost the thread of your question. You were you're talking about the 19-year-old. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just talking with someone about this, that just from an acting perspective, when I got out of grad school, I didn't know what kind of actor I was going to be or what my career was going to look like. I had some vague sense / hope that it would be a good career, but I didn't know if I would be a regional theater actor who ended up on Broadway or have an indie film that kind of hit, or if I could even be in film, or it turned out to be the thing that brought me to attention was the sitcom, which was not what my plan was. But I have to now kind of, that's part of my history. And there was a little bit of sadness when things start to coalesce, because there's a narrowing that goes on. I think that's what Jesse says to Zibby. Like, when I was in college, everything was in front of me. And now it's like your choices as you get older just become consequential. And it doesn't mean that you made the wrong choice. It just means your next choices will be standing on the shoulders of the previous choices. And there's a little bit of a sadness in kind of giving up the blank slate of it all.
Yeah.
And that you also realize you weren't at your best, like it's easy to, I don't know, this is just the metaphor that's coming to me, but it's easy to like stay at home and imagine you would have not said the wrong thing at the party, but you went to the party and you like had some weird conversations and some good conversations, and it was like a more complicated affair than you realized. And I find like we can all be heroes in our own head, but like like life scuffs you up and it's a little bit messy. And if you're doing it, you're going to get your hands dirty. You're going to have regrets. You're going to have relationships that didn't work. You're going to say the wrong thing. You're going to be less than your best self. And that's, I guess, where that kind of notion of forgiveness comes in. Like, how can we move forward with some sense of purpose and agency without wanting to isolate and be agoraphobic and just hide? Like, it's I think life is like really gorgeous, but there's also an ache underneath it. And I think sometimes with my movies, I'm trying to convince myself that I can be okay and I can be better. Like this was really fascinating. A couple of like last week, I found an old journal that I'd been keeping on my computer since started in 1998, and I was writing it through like 2012, and some days, like a year would go by and I wouldn't write, and but it was a longish document. And in 98, 99, 2000, 2001, 2003, I was really writing a lot in it. And one of the things that I found that was so shocking to me was that I would veer between like a kind of grandiosity and a kind of self-loathing, sometimes in the same paragraph.
Yeah, isn't that funny?
Just these wild mood swings of self-perception. But what I really was struck by was how good I got at talking myself into a better space around being a young actor in New York City. Because I would get knocked down, I'd have audition after audition, and they wouldn't go my way, or I'd get close to things and wouldn't get them. And I would just come home feeling really spent and really down. But I found that I got really good at talking myself out of my funk, talking myself into lessening the amount of time where I had to be down. Like I wrote, at one point I wrote, "Don't be in such a hurry. Rome wasn't built its first year out of grad school." And just this positive. I was like giving myself pep talk.
Yeah, self-therapy.
Yeah, and I realized that how healthy that was, and how I always tell people, and this is probably true not just outside of acting, but I always tell people there's training to be an actor and there's talent. That's one thing that will not give you a career. There's this whole other side thing of like your psychology and your resilience and your vigilance that they do not teach you in drama school. Like, how are you going to be in the day-to-day trenches of like what you tell yourself and what meaning you make out of the things that happen or don't happen? Like, that is really key. And I think if you look, that's probably a theme in my movies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, so much good stuff there. I feel like the big thing that you know, it would be so, I just keep thinking this whole time, I love listening to you talk. You're very articulate and you have so much wisdom and quotes and knowledge that you collage in this beautiful way when you speak. And so I was like, dude, he needs to start a podcast. And then you could talk to Richard Rohr and you could talk to people about this whole other side of it, the mindset side, which you've really trained yourself, like you said, but they don't teach you. And then also, you know, I'm a huge journaler and a journaling enthusiast. I like to
you wrote
say.
A whole book about it.
Yeah. I'm definitely not an expert, but I'm a cheerleader of journaling. And people always ask me, you know, why do you journal? You know, why is it something that is worth doing? And I really think that exact thing that you just shared about how you can self-soothe down the page, you know, sometimes just letting it out of your mind, getting it onto the page, seeing it, you can become your own inner mentor and therapist or whatever, and be your own best friend. And it also helps with the self-awareness piece, which I think is so key to changing anything. So It really helps with the mindset. I think that's so brilliant, and what a cool thing that you found that recently.
I know. And then also I think it's not something a lot of people acknowledge, but even the most kind of sane person, if they really self-observe, will see that they're filled with contradictory impulses and like wild mood swings and you know, like, I love him, I hate him, I'm cold, I'm hot. Like our mind, like I always say, the inmates have the run of the asylum. Like it really is, it's really kind of mad in the head. And there's something about getting it out on the page. And even if you just see how crazy you are, that's valuable. Mm-hmm. You know, because it's kind of like, whatever Ouspensky or someone says, you know, like acknowledging that you're asleep is like the beginning of awakening. Yeah. Like you kind of have to like really take full stock of what's going on.
Yeah. Liz Gilbert says our minds are not a place that we want to walk around alone in at night or whatever. Yeah. And I think also too, you know, for me, I think in your 20s, and I'm sure in general in your entire life, we change so quickly. You know, I think my 20s have been like this second adolescence that nobody really tells you about, that you're just constantly changing. Like I'm probably a different person than the beginning of this podcast, and like I'll be different on Saturday. But you can see that, I think, when you're journaling or you're doing any sort of internal practice, TM or whatever, where you're having to face yourself, because I think especially with technology, we're so often not wanting to be with ourselves that we cope instead. And so we're on our phones, or we're watching TV, or we're doing other things, which is fine. And I think coping mechanisms are brilliant and we need them sometimes, but eventually you have to feel our feelings, and we don't want to feel our feelings a lot of times, so we avoid them.
Well, I've also noticed that a lot of kind of growing up or kind of waking up on some level is like you have to acquaint yourself with the death process. Like you actually have to say, there are parts of me dying, and not only let them die, but encourage them to die. And a lot of people don't want to do that because it is loss. But at the same time, like when something dies, you know, nature hates a vacuum, like something else gets born. And I remember I ran into this kid I went to high school with. This is like 9 years ago. And he like kind of pulled me aside, and he'd had a couple drinks, and he was like, I'm telling you, Radnor, I'm the same guy I was in high school. I haven't changed at all. And I remember thinking, that's the saddest thing I've ever heard. Like, what do you mean? I just read Muhammad Ali said, you know, if you're 50 and you still have the same, you know, kind of worldview as you did at 20, like you've wasted 30 years. And I think it's like on some things are easier for us to kind of step into and allow for as we get older, and other things are hard. Like even just allowing that you don't have all the time in the world. Like when you hit 40, you go, like, am I gonna do the great thing I thought I was gonna do? Am I gonna be the person I wanted to be? Like, I've actually talked to a couple friends who are my age, and we're all kind of going, man, when we were younger, life seemed so long, and now we're finally understanding what it means when people say life is really short. Mm-hmm. But you don't get that until you're like, time is just, I don't know what it's doing. It's very strange. It's like days can be endless and years fly by. Like it's really baffling. But I have noticed that the more I can kind of, it sounds a little grisly, but the more I can acquaint myself with death, and by that I mean letting go of old versions of me and visions of what I thought was true. Like that thing in Happy Thank You More Please to say, like, every 5 years you realize what an idiot you were.
Yeah, I wrote that
and
down.
I feel like I kind of put that in my movie as a little bit of a like Easter egg to myself. Like, you believe everything you're writing in this movie, but in 5 years you might not. And I couldn't make that movie now. Like, I'm super happy I made that movie. I love that movie, and I'm happy people discover it and everything, but it's not those themes aren't up for me as urgently as they were when I was working on that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It's interesting because the publishing process, or putting any creative work out there that isn't, I guess, like a blog that you can change or it's editable, it's always been the case like this with looking back at yourself. I remember being in like 5th grade and looking back at my 2nd grade self and like cringing, and so
yeah.
Even this book that I put out just a couple months ago, the publishing process took so long, and I wrote the book like over 2 years ago, and so even though I still stand by it and it's great, but it's so who I was 2 years ago, and I'm sure that's how you feel.
It's like the tyranny of writing in the first person.
Right. Yeah. And this kind of speaks to what we're talking about, and I think I've heard you talk about this before, but that interesting thing that happened, and I think this kind of speaks to what you were saying about, with getting older, but I've recently realized, you're not the youngest one in the room anymore, and you're kind of doing things at the expected adult time to be doing things. Yeah. And I think Happy Thank You More Please addresses this theme a lot throughout the movie, but and liberal arts too, I guess, but maybe you could speak to that moment in life and how you deal with feeling like you have all of these dreams and aspirations and you're no longer a prodigy, you're just making work at the normal rate.
Yeah. I was obsessed with that idea a couple of years ago. I was writing a short story. This is years ago, but it was something like just this notion that you were too old to be a prodigy.
Yeah.
Like, you suddenly cross that line, and it's like, now if you make something great, it's like, great, you're an adult who made something great. You're not like a whiz kid.
Right.
That's another death, the death of like, you're not a prodigy. I think that when, you get to a certain age and things become a little less sexy, for lack of a better word. Like, like, not a lot of the business of what I do is literally just sitting at my laptop and kind of slaving over, like, agonizing over sentences or dialogue or plot points, and it's not all that glamorous in some ways. Like, a movie premiere at Sundance has a certain glamour, but it also will never kind of give you what you're looking for because it's so fleeting. So to fall in love with the work, like the actual, what the Buddhists call, chop wood, carry water, like literally just falling in love with the kind of basics of waking up, knowing you have something to say and you have the skills and the platform to say it, is an incredible thing. I mean, I think there was something that my acting teacher at NYU used to say. It was actually Olympia Dukakis, who used to teach at NYU, and she said this to them, that the reasons you become an actor are not the reasons you stay an actor. So it's like, you didn't get a lot of attention when you were a kid, or it was the only way your parent would pay attention to you when you were in a play, or something that is like maybe born of a little bit of damage or something. But by the time you're 25, 35, 45, and maybe even every decade, you have to reassess why you're doing it, or anything for that matter. And what keeps you doing it. And I know for me, the reasons I wanted to become an actor are so not the reasons I'm still an actor. And the reasons I wanted to write are so not the reasons I'm currently writing. So there's this reassessment process that has to happen when you step into a more kind of adult space. I think I veered a little bit off your question, but I feel like that's in the neighborhood of what we were talking about.
No, that was great. I think something that you mentioned at the beginning of that was just about how all of the parts of something aren't glamorous. And I was feeling really lazy recently. And then I heard this quote from somebody about, they never, I think it's maybe Stephen King. Anyway, they said he doesn't like writing, he likes having written. And I think that really kind of changed everything for me. I was like, oh, it's not just me. Sometimes like that time in the chair actually doing it isn't as glamorous as the idea coming in and catching the idea, or the putting it out in the world and seeing what happens. Like those things are maybe why we do it, but then it's the actual monotonous part of it that you have to really push yourself to
I mean
do.
that's where the pros like know how to sit in the discomfort. I mean, some days writing for me is so antidepressive. Like if I have a good day of writing, it's exhilarating.
Yeah.
And then there are other days where, I mean, this is a gross analogy, but it's like passing a kidney stone.
Oh,
where
I've done that. It's terrible.
You're like, this thing is like moving out of me and it's painful, but there's also this sweet relief when something actually does happen. I mean, if I can get 2 or 3 good sentences or a paragraph in a day, I'm writing a book right now, and it's like, if that happens, like I'll call it a good day's work, like I'm not so precious that I need to write 2,000 or 3,000 words a day or anything. Stephen King's book on writing, though, is terrific. Have you read it?
No, I just heard him interviewed on Fresh Air, and like the writer's book of all the Fresh Air interviews, and he was talking about, it must have been that book, because I think it was from a couple of years ago, but I really want to read it.
Yeah, it's excellent. And I think it's writer, that's a very common thing among writers. It's like there's a lot of writers that don't like writing. I actually like writing when I feel that something is coming out of me that feels like it wants to, and when that ease kind of happens where you're like, wow, I'm not entirely in control of this process. That's why I love the Elizabeth Gilbert kind of TED talk on creativity and genius being this like exogenous force that you're partnering with. Yeah. I found that there's something psychologically healthy about that, and also true about that. And I think sometimes I'll look at things I've written and I'll think, I don't know that this is mine exactly. Like this just, and not to be too woo-woo about it, but there is that beautiful moment when something comes through kind of just the way you would have hoped, but a little bit better. Or it's what athletes call flow.
Yeah.
I'm sure Steph Curry like sinks a couple shots where he's like, wow.
Yeah.
Like that was good.
Where'd that come from?
Where'd that come from? Exactly.
Yeah, totally. Can we stay in this a little more? I would love to hear some of your writing practices and some of the, if you have any traditions or anything lately. And also, congrats on the book. I'm so excited and I can't wait to read it. But if you could tell us a little bit about your writing process for that and just in general.
Well, I wrote a book a couple years ago and I sold it to a publisher, and I got part of an advance, and it was happening. And for a variety of reasons, some of which I will go into and some of which I won't, I returned the advance and didn't publish the book.
Is it a novel? Can you say what?
No, it was kind of memoir adjacent. It was written in the first person. It was very it was honest. It was an honest book, but at the same, the kind of 5 years later, I look back at some of it and it's like, oh my God, thank God that didn't go out in the world, because I feel like I would have been having to defend things that I no longer believe. But I also saw that my fuel for it was, part of my fuel was a little misplaced, and I think it I don't know how much I want to go into this, because I'm gonna write a little bit about this, like why I didn't publish this.
Yeah, no worries.
Why I'm giving it another go. But I was having some changes in my life that were extraordinary, and I knew that that was another thing about reading those journals, was I was as interested in myself as an actor as I was as a writer. Like I was constantly saying, feel how good your fingers feel moving on these keyboards, formulating thoughts. Like, remember this, because I think I was a little haunted by all the hours I wasn't writing. That's how I know I'm a writer. I have writer DNA, because I'm always thinking I should be writing.
Yeah. Everything is copy?
No, not quite that. Just more like, I don't like wasting time. Like I feel like I need to get my hours in the day of writing. But I try to let a better version of myself take over when I'm writing, because I'm writing stuff that is almost, like I said, like in those journals, like a pep talk to myself. I try to be really honest with where I'm at, but also honest about where I know I could be. And this taps into a little more of like my filmmaking philosophy, which is that we don't really talk about virtue much anymore. Like, I heard these two words that I thought were so terrific, just in terms of thinking about a guiding philosophy for life. They were decency and dignity. And I was thinking, wow, we do not talk about those words. Like, those are not words that are considered revenue generating or headline grabbing. You know what I mean? Like, we're so more interested in being provocative and interesting and transgressive. And this is another thing that started to happen to me the older I'm getting. I'm like, am I becoming like a old fogey conservative? Like, my politics still leans left, but there is a lot about our culture that I think, like, what is this? Like, what are we doing? Like, what are we celebrating? And so part of my guiding philosophy for creating things is I want to feel like I'm making stuff that is speaking to the latent parts of myself that are actually aspirationally good, and not the parts of myself that are, want to rubberneck the latest calamity or atrocious thing that someone said. It's like I was taught by a teacher that psychology is actually the world's oldest science, and it's the study of the psyche, the study of the soul. And it used to be the study of man's potential. Like, and that's where a lot of those myths came from, Perseus and Theseus, and what a man conquering himself. And now psychology is basically like about disorders. Like, it's stories about how we kind of turn the spotlight in and we say, oh, look how terrible and miserable we are. All of which is not, it's not an unworthy story to tell, but I feel like don't stop there. Like show characters like getting out of it or transforming, Someone asked me, would you make a movie about a heroin addict? And I said, of course, but I'd want to watch them get sober. Right. Like, that's more interesting to me. I'm not interested in the just watching people go down the drain more and more and more. I'm not super interested in like how evil we could be, because A, I feel like it's just not that interesting. B, I think it encourages the worst parts of ourselves. And C, I don't even know if it's true ultimately. I think we have to be careful about the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. So I don't know why, but I'm oriented towards like wanting to tell stories that are more about transformation and more about growth. And that's not in vogue, I don't think necessarily, but I realized when Happy Thank You More Please was at Sundance and it was getting standing ovations and you couldn't get a ticket, and it won the audience award, and then it won the audience award at like every festival it played at, and then it came out and critics were just horrible to it, and I was like, oh, I must really be onto something. Like, it made me feel like I know people like this movie. I know people's hearts are opened by this movie, and there's this apparatus that is like, no, like, this is not art. This is not sophisticated. And then I realized that I had stumbled almost accidentally into this cultural fault line where there was this hunger for people to be told, like, everything's going to be okay and we can do better than this. Like, an actual hunger for someone to stand up and say that. And yet, the kind of cultural gatekeepers are like, no, that's not what's sophisticated. That's not what's cool. That's not what's interesting. And so I just decided to double down on it rather than being someone who is like, well, I guess my vision isn't valid. I was like, no, I think my vision's actually quite valid, and I'm just going to keep going.
Yeah. You said once your movies are about people becoming more themselves. And
or getting better at being themselves.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. I'm trying to quote you to you. But yeah, I loved that so much. And that's what's interesting to me too. And I think stories that aren't about that, or for using your example, like the heroin addict, not about them getting sober seems incomplete to me. It seems like that's not a full story. That's a beginning of a story.
Right. And it's also not, it doesn't even go with the kind of archetypal, hero's journey, which is like, yes, leave home, go into the dark wood, confront the darkness, but be transformed and then return home different. So I feel like it's almost like not honoring where stories really want to go internally, like where we need them to go to feel the catharsis. And also to leave feeling like my favorite movies are movies where I leave feeling excited about life and excited about art, excited about the possibility of something like more interesting. Because I think we're in a moment, I don't know what's going on. I can't diagnose it entirely in this moment, but like whatever's going on right now feels, it's brutal, it's really, words like hope and love and possibility are like considered cliche and are not, as if only rubes talk about those things, or the blindly religious, or the kind of these Pollyanna things, and I feel like, wow, I really wish we could talk about them from a sober, practical place that is not it's not swatted away so easily.
Yeah. Well, we can on my podcast.
Yeah, no, that's why we're here.
Yeah, I mean, I think having conversations like this, and that's why I love the long form conversation, because I feel like you can really whisper these things right into people's ears, and like you were saying before, we're so porous, it all goes right in, and that's why your work is so meaningful to me, and I'm glad we're having this conversation and that you're making more of it with what you're writing. But so going back to the writing process a little bit, any specifics, like practical things with your process? Are you a morning writer, an evening writer? Do you, write in spurts or longer periods and take breaks? I'm really curious about that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, I always try to get a meditation in the morning before I write. And something that's really good for me, but I don't do it a lot, is to, go on a walk or hike or jog before I write, and I kind of come back with a lot of energy. But a lot of times I'll just park it and get some caffeine going and just kind of go. I really am in a fight with not engaging with the world before I've done some writing. I think it's a common thing, like I actually heard, there might even be a book called Don't Check Your Email First Thing in the Morning. Like it's so literal, because they say it puts you in a reactive mode rather than a proactive mode. And I've really found that to be true. And but sometimes there's this pull. I mean, this is why I really think we're living in a everyone's an addict right now to all this stuff. And so I'm trying to, I try to observe that and see. And some days I really can do stuff, and other days it's not. I probably could sit in the discomfort of like the blinking cursor a little bit more. Like I tend to reach for, like you said, like a coping, like maybe just one more article about how bad Donald Trump is will then set me on the right path to writing. And it rarely does, it actually is a drain of my energy. But sometimes I'll get in a groove and I'll write, and then I'll go on a hike and write more stuff into my phone as I'm thinking of it, and then I come back and I write a little bit more. Like when I have my teeth in something, it's a kind of round the clock thing. Other times it's a little bit more, okay, I put in some hours this morning, now I can go on with my day. But if I do have a good writing day, I feel much freer to just do things. But a lot of times, I write. I'll write little fragments when they occur to me and then try to pound them into shape. Sometimes I'll have a pre-existing thing that I feel like needs to be expanded. I just worked really hard on 2 chapters in my book, and I don't quite know where to go right now. Also because I'm kind of waiting for notes from my editor, so I kind of want to see if she thinks I'm onto something. So I'm in a bit of a holding pattern in the moment, but I still feel there's so much that needs to be written, and I'm still writing screenplays and TV shows. So I have more than enough to write. It's just a matter of just finding the time to do it. And I like to think that the stuff that really wants to be written just gets written.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how when you are on to something and you're just in the flow, like we were talking about before, I find that like my legs are falling asleep. I haven't gotten up to go to the bathroom, and I just want to sit there and do
I
it.
get like food comes to be like an annoyance. Like when I'm when I'm in a groove.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I have to eat because I'm like shaking with hunger, and yet I don't want to leave this moment. And then I also feel like after I eat, I'm always just a touch less.
Totally. I relate to that so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. And that's why the first thing in the morning time can be so powerful. I know for me, I never let myself finish unless I had like the idea or the prompt kind of a thing of where I want to go the next day. So then I didn't, because there's so much to be written. There's so much I could do. Where do I even start? That overwhelm.
Yeah.
So I like to have a spot that I can get excited about getting out of bed to do.
I think that's a Hemingway trick where he talked about if you know where you're headed at the end of the day, save it for the morning. And I think that's so smart. I haven't really utilized that. Although I'm really taken with have you read Bird by Bird, Anne Lamott?
No, I haven't read it. I've wanted to though. Another one on my list.
I mean, the gist is like, I think it was her brother when he was younger was supposed to do this book report on birds, and he was supposed to be working on it all semester, and he waited until the last night, and he's just sitting there, kind of tears in his eyes, with stacks of bird books in front of him, and his father came up behind him and just put his hands on his shoulders and said, "Just take it bird by bird, son, bird by bird." And that's her whole theory about writing: is you do these little projects. If you think about writing a novel, you're not going to write it because it's too daunting. But if you think about, a man walks into a bar and sees a woman in a white hat, like just describe that. Like, okay, that's your project. Man walks into a bar, sees a woman with a white hat, and then go on to the next project. Like just break it down into kind of bite-sized bits.
Yeah. Oh, this is so good. I love talking about writing like this from you. It's great. So this is sort of different topic, but you said something on Mark Maron's podcast that really stuck with me. And you were saying, which is kind of funny that I'm talking about something that I think you did a couple of years ago from the earlier part of our conversation and how quickly we change. But hopefully you'll still stand by this, or if not, that'll be interesting too. But basically you were saying that when you were starting with acting, sometimes you can generate it for yourself by feeling good enough from other people believing in you, mentors and other people. And you brought it up really in the context of career, but I think it can just be true for our entire life. And you were saying, when you were 19 in like a summer theater program, 2 actors separately told you that, you're going to be an actor, and that really validated you in this way.
Yeah.
And so hearing that, and you put that in you somewhere for a rainy day, and I've done that with certain compliments from mentors or milestones, and I've let them validate me. But how do you do kind of the opposite and generate that enoughness from yourself and not being dependent on outside things or other people as you've gotten older?
That's a great question. I mean, I'll do my best. I mean, I think that the baton does have to be passed. Do you know what I mean? From that validation seeking or hunger to I like that term, enoughness. And how do you find that within? I mean, some of it will be you've done enough that it just is like I can walk into a room now for a meeting with a director, or even meeting potential actors for a movie I might be directing, and I have enough wind at my sails just in terms of experience and miles in the saddle where I can talk with a certain level of confidence. I mean, look, I'm scared all the time. I mean, if you're doing a new thing, you're going to be justifiably scared, and that's a good feeling. Like sometimes it's good to walk away from things that actually don't scare you. But at the same time, you start to get a sense that Well, I've been doing this since 1999, and I've never had to get another job doing it. So I know that I'm a statistic in probability. So I know that I'm in the pros. Like I'm a professional at this, and just having that sense that you're where you belong. Because one of the things about I'm sure it's true for writers, it's true for actors, is there's this sense of like, well, who am I to think I can do this? Like, why do I think I belong? And there's this feeling that you're like outside the velvet rope, they're not letting you in. And then you question, do I deserve to be in? But at a certain point, you've been invited in enough that you go, oh, I guess this is like who I am and what I'm good at. And then you let that fuel you. But at the same time, when you are younger, those little moments of someone winking at you, or it feels like you're kind of being given the secret handshake, because it's so mystifying. Like, who gets to be a published writer? Who gets to be an actor that professionally does it? Like, it feels mysterious, especially me. I was coming from Ohio. I didn't know anyone in the business, like a mentor of mine who directed me at NYU, and he was also ran a summer program at the Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis, where I was one summer. He died last year, and he was a beautiful, beautiful man. And we had a kind of wake for him at NYU with NYU and Juilliard students, and University of Utah, where he also taught. And when I spoke about him, I said, when I was learning from Ken, I didn't know that I could be an actor, or I didn't have the faith that I could be an actor, but I always knew that Ken thought I could be an actor. Like until I had metabolized that knowledge myself, I did have to delegate it to other people. But luckily there were people that were generous enough to hold that for me and say, yeah, you can absolutely do this. And people have pointed out to me over the years, and it's not even something I realize, but it's 100% a theme of my movies is mentorship. Mm-hmm. That friends are step in when a friend is down, but there's also different cross-generational kind of mentorships, certainly in liberal arts. But it's in both movies, and another movie I have ready to go, 100% it's in there, and fourth movie I have ready to go, it's also in there. So I think
yay, more movies.
Yeah. It just means something to me to because I've felt the grace of a person saying the right thing at the right time, and I've also been used for that purpose for other people, and it feels dramatic to me. It feels like, and it's also, again, it's archetypal. I mean, who is Yoda and Obi-Wan if not their mentors?
Yeah, no, I love those themes, and I'm so grateful for all the mentors I have in my life, people that I've met through this podcast, and people that I haven't met. Like, I consider you a mentor through your work, and I think you can, now with the internet, that's one really awesome thing, that anybody can kind of be your mentor just from being a connoisseur of their work and following them in that way.
Yeah, it's kind of I always say, like, choose your heroes wisely. Mm-hmm. Like, it feels we can choose so many lousy heroes. Like, there's so many options out there. And, like, it's kind of, I don't know why this just strikes me that Oliver Stone made Wall Street, and it was it's kind of a parody. And then Michael Douglas says greed is good. And clearly Oliver Stone was not advocating that position, but like then you have a generation of young wannabe stockbrokers who have pictures of Gordon Gekko on their walls, and you think like, oh, that's like they chose the wrong hero. Like that's not the right hero.
Yeah.
And I think like how do you know if you're choosing the right hero is like how do you feel like internally, and if you feel anything other than like peace, like get a better hero.
Yeah, there you go. That's such a good not distinction, but it's such a good test to know.
Yeah, like if they create more restlessness and hunger in you, then it's not, I don't think that's a good hero.
yeah, peace. I think that's kind of the thing to chase, to be honest.
Yeah. It might be the only thing. And in fact, I think, I people toss the word happiness around a lot because I think I had it in my first movie just in the title, but like I'm so much more an advocate for peace than happiness, because I
totally.
Like, happiness is, you've got to pay for it on the other end on some level, or it's like a spike, and there's all sorts of chemical stuff at work. But peace has no opposite, right? Like peace is just like, I'm here. Everything that comes my way, I can accept. I'm of service. There's a calmer dimension to it.
Yeah, I think Deepak Chopra said once, happiness is divine discontent. And he said that is the way he defined it because it leaves room for the creative impulse. And it's so true. It's kind of what we've been talking about this entire conversation about, I think you would agree with this, and I'm definitely happiest when I'm creating, when I've gotten a little bit of writing in, or if I've done a podcast that was really great, or whatever it is, had a conversation with someone that was a great conversation, just not recorded or whatever. And I think that is peace, is that, divine discontent of wrestling with something. I think we actually do want. And I've been thinking about that a lot when it comes to nostalgia, where even things that when I was in it didn't feel comfortable and great, if you look back on them, you someday might become nostalgic for that. So I think it's like a great argument to be present, because you never know if you're going to be nostalgic for right now.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's true. Yeah.
And somebody said, I don't know who said this, but somebody was like, nostalgia, if you're nostalgic for something, it means you weren't present when you were there the first time.
I said that.
Oh, you said that?
I said that.
That's so funny.
There's a great thing that Richard Greenberg...
That doesn't surprise me at all. That's so funny. I'm just laughing so hard right now.
Yeah. Richard Greenberg, who's a terrific playwright, I'm doing a play of his at Lincoln Center in the fall, and he had this quote where he said, nostalgia is simply a longing for a time you can survive.
That's so good too.
We're in the moment of like, I don't know if I can make my way through this, but I know I can through that.
Evidence.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just not over the fact that I just quoted you to you on the phone.
Like when Harry Met Sally, remember when Harry Fisher quotes some Bruno Kirby? Yeah.
Oh my gosh, so funny. Oh my gosh.
I hope I said that. I'm almost sure I said that.
Well, for all these purposes.
You know why I know why I say that? Because I speak to a lot of colleges, and they ask, like, do you have any advice for like how to be at how to have our senior year, how to get the most out of our senior year? And I just talk to them about being really present and feeling their feet as they're walking across the quad and taking deep breaths and saying, like, this is happening, I'm here. And that if they don't, they're going to get hit with like a wave of nostalgia because they didn't appreciate it enough, and they're going to be sad. Yeah.
No, you definitely said it, because I listen to a lot of your stuff, and it would make sense that it's somewhere in my psyche. So you definitely said it. So
Right. I've incepted my way in.
Yeah, it's so funny. So another thing that I want to bring up to you that I'm curious about is, and you talk about this a little bit in Happy Thank You More Please, through Mary Catherine and Charlie's storyline of the two different viewpoints when it comes to New York and LA. And I'm a very spatially oriented person, and I find that, I've been thinking a lot lately. A big question for me right now is, finding your home and figuring out where to live. And another thing we have in common is we're both Midwestern, and that's, you've said yourself, is a defining characteristic in you. And so I'd love to know, kind of what that means to you to be Midwestern. And then also, what do you think about finding your home, having spent time in both New York and LA and traveling a lot, and you're in Richmond today? What do you think about finding your home, deciding where and when to move, and practicing non-attachment when it comes to a place, but also it does become part of us in some way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, in terms of Midwesternness,
there are a bunch of questions in there, sorry.
Yeah. Where are you from? Michigan?
Yeah, Michigan. I live in Detroit now.
Okay. I thought I place such a premium on just like basic kindness, and that seems to be a Midwestern quality. Not that everyone else is unkind, but it just seems to be like, we'll take you in, we'll feed you. There's a
come on over.
It's come on over. There's enough for everyone. There's a a politeness to it, which I also just value, kind of basic manners. And I always get a little like weirdly shocked when I see rude people in the world. I'm like, what are you doing? Like,
Yeah, me too.
Didn't we all agree that we were going to be like courteous and nice to each other? But we didn't actually. That's just like my own naivete. But I think there's also, there's a little, we're landlocked. I don't know how that infuses our psychology, but there's a lot about artists coming from smaller towns, that kind of journey, Shakespeare coming from Stratford to London, and even, to get very grand about it, like Jesus coming from Nazareth to Jerusalem. Like, there's this journey that is like you come from a more humble place, and then you journey to a bigger city. Yeah. And that's been my journey, and I think it's also been a stabilizing force in my life, because I didn't want to become a jerk or a parody of showbiz success. So I kind of clung to my Midwesternness even more. Like, it became more important to me the older I got, and to just kind of walk and talk those values a little bit more. And then, there's also, like, whenever I meet Midwesterners in the world, especially in New York and LA, there's always this kind of instant connection. Like, oh, like, our Thanksgivings were probably similar, and like our high schools were probably like similar. And there's a sweet point of connection. In terms of home, it took me a long time to find my home. I always felt when I was in New York, I would bop around from, sublet to sublet or rental to rental. And I never felt like I really could grow roots there as much as I loved it. I think New York is a really fascinating town, because it's, your best days in New York are really, really triumphantly good, and your worst days are among the worst days you'll ever put on record. It's just such a town of extremes. And I found that when I got out to California, I loved California. I like LA. I actually really like LA. I defend Los Angeles. And I'm not a like Mary Catherine person. I'm actually more of a Charlie person when it comes to LA. But I found that once I got a house and I was able to have a space, like extra space for people to, like friends, to live with me when they were homeless, and just to provide like a community gathering place, really has been meaningful to me. I was just home for like 5 days last weekend, because I had some time off from shooting in Richmond, and it was so wonderful to feel like I had this like place to charge my battery. And but at the same time, I love this Herman Hesse poem called Stages. I don't know if you know it, but it was actually the first song Ben Lee and I wrote, because we're making an album together. It was cool. We were talking about, we had a melody, and I said, do you know this Herman Hesse poem, Stages? And he loved it. And so we kind of riffed on this poem, and it's all about, don't make a home of any place, because spirit is actually trying to move you to wider spaces, and don't grow too many roots, like be malleable and adaptable. And I feel, the guy I bought my house from actually gave me that poem when I was leaving my little rinky-dink $750 a month one-bedroom apartment, because I was actually attached to it. Like, I did not want to leave this tiny little apartment, because it was mine and it was what I knew. Yeah. I didn't want to go to a bigger place. I mean, my house is not ostentatious at all, but it's lovely. And so this poem has always meant something to me, because I had to leave my home to find my home, and I know that one day I'm going to have to leave that home. But one of the great things about being an actor, and I was just talking with some of the cast members on Mercy Street about this last night, is in an age where everything is so predetermined, your news feed is only kind of speaking to your political beliefs. The things you buy, you kind of get offered more of the same. Yeah,
Netflix, curated.
Yeah, it's curated. We're rarely encouraged to go outside of our comfort zone. It's like, if you like this, you'll like this.
Right.
And it just takes you deeper into your tastes and preferences. But one of the great things about being an actor or being an artist generally is the hands of fate still work in our lives. You know, I get a job and I have to come to a town I don't know, and I meet all these terrific people, and there's magic that happens in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it can be like camp, you know. I think about that a lot, and I think that's one of the appeals and the nostalgia from college is that it's like this built-in community, and that I think is one of the contrasting things into your early 20s that really like hits you hard, or it hit me really hard of like, oh, you have to make friends and you have to navigate this,
like,
and not everyone.
Where's the dining hall?
Yeah.
Like, that's actually confused. I was like, aren't we all going to be fed at the same time? I mean, no, that's silly, but there was something so sweet about just feeding yourselves at the same place at the same time. And, you know, I'm over that part of it, but I remember it felt like being plunged into ice cold waters. And I was like, this doesn't feel right somehow. And I think what we're speaking to is like, there is a longing for community.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
For fellowship. And, you know, even when you have kids, like in this has only been the last 100 years where we've had to pay for childcare, because it was always done by the grandparents and the neighbors, and everyone looked after each other. But there's this kind of urban breakdown that it causes some soul sickness in us.
Yeah, I've been so, like, a big thing in my life right now is I want just more white space. You know, I was so focused on work and creating things, and I want more community. And I think that online I've kind of created some community, which is great and fantastic, and thank you everyone listening. But like, it kind of gives you a hit of it, and so you feel like you don't really need it. And then it was like I almost woke up one morning and I was like, oh wait, I need to have real in-person community, and the type of people that I can snuggle and bring me soup when I'm sick and touch and feel. And that's kind of, it reminded me of, you know, that feeling you got when you went home and having people over. I mean, isn't it the best, you know?
Yeah.
It's the best. And, you know, that must be great when you're acting and you can, you know, kind of be built into a community. And I think working from home can be so wonderful but isolating, and we can be so isolated working remotely and doing things remotely that we do kind of have to force ourselves to have community and look at it as like a healthy thing for your personal growth, you know? Yeah.
I mean, we are relational creatures. There can be no doubt, you know? And, you know, I think it's not like we're going to halt the march of technology and fragmentation, but I think we can be aware of what's happening to us and take steps to provide some antidotes for it. You know, if that means, I mean, I even heard there's a trend that's developing of people, you know, couples, like 3 or 4 couples who have kids, like kind of buying a complex together and actually creating their own.
That's so cool.
Little community where they can look after each other and eat together and provide their kids with more interaction and face with actual humans and not screens.
I think that's amazing. I think that's so amazing. And I love what you were talking about before too, about, you know, that was fascinating when you compared it to Buddha or Jesus or all of these people. I think going to a city, I've been thinking about that a lot, you know, leaving. I have never lived outside of Michigan other than when I studied abroad, even though I went to a different city. But I feel like when I was in LA talking to, I was with Pete's girlfriend Val, and she was talking about moving to LA and how it was such a personal growth experience for her, and really kind of encouraging me something like that. And it really hit me in this conversation how valuable that can be. I just think that's really interesting.
It's valuable because it's terrifying.
Yeah.
Is part of it, you know, and it tests parts of yourself that are kind of lying dormant.
Yeah.
I think that way about travel, you know, like I always think if you stay in the same place, you stare at the same things all the time. And literally that just provokes most of the same thoughts. Like most of our thoughts are just the same neurotic loop on repeat. But when you go to a different country, when you hear different languages, when you see different faces and different ways of living, and the sun feels different and the architecture is different, you actually, different thoughts get provoked, different, more interesting, new, fresh thoughts.
Yeah. It's like that episode of Seinfeld when George does the opposite of everything for a day.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a tool in my book that I have everyone do that essentially and like write about it. And it's just, yeah, it just turns everything upside down, and it's good for your creativity, your maturity. It's, yeah.
Yeah. And I wish, I sometimes have this very immature feeling like, I wish growth didn't require so much risk and discomfort. Like I wish it was like, like we could, I
Press
just
a
wish it
button.
was less thorny. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
it's kind of like writing, like we were saying. It's like we like having grown, maybe not growing, you know?
oh yeah. 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 And it's, just the term growing pains. Like I remember when my legs were actually growing and how much pain I was in, it felt like invisible people were just pulling my body in different directions, and I just had to sit through the discomfort of it. And then that process becomes internal when you get older.
Yeah. Oh man, you articulated that so well. It's so, yeah, so good. This has been such a good conversation. So a couple more things.
Yeah.
You're speaking of good conversations, your movies are so relatable and they're so conversational, which I love. And they're these deep conversations that I want to be having all the time. And I love that. So, which is probably why I have a podcast and record most of my conversations with people. But what do you think makes a good conversationalist, and what makes a good conversation to be in and be having?
I think it requires like equal parts. I have something to share, and also, I'm fully want to hear what you have to say, and I didn't know that, and that's fascinating, and just kind of an interplay between receptivity and offering something. Sometimes you get in conversations where the ball isn't being hit back a little bit, like just as a tennis kind of thing. The best conversations for me are, to take this analogy further, is like you get a great volley going, and and you have a similar game, but you're also really challenging each other, and you're kind of hitting the ball back as hard as it's coming at you. Another. It's just when the conversation feels a little lopsided. I know you're asking me questions right now, so I don't want people to think this is like my ideal conversation. It's like if we were properly having a conversation, I would be doing some more investigative reporting on you. But
Next time.
yeah, next time on my podcast.
Yes.
But I think curiosity probably, and being open to learning something new, not having an agenda around getting someone to think the way you think. I mean, that's really the poison in our culture right now, is this inability to be with people who disagree with you, thinking they're the devil if they disagree. And it's just, I think the art of conversation maybe has eroded a bit. And again, it's something we have to fight for, because as we become more locked into these screens, as we get self-driving cars, and you know what I mean? Like, we're just going to keep getting more and more isolated.
Yeah.
So I think like it's heroes' work to stay connected.
Yeah. I do think of technology, though. Podcasts are the thing kind of keeping long conversations alive.
Oh, certainly. It's a fascinating, and the popularity of them speaks to this notion that people
Starving.
People really do want to sit with a conversation. They don't want to kind of read a headline and move on and keep, not click.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh no, I was just gonna say they're unedited. They're raw and real, and they're improvised, like Zibby says in the movie. Everything is, but it's we don't want sound bites. We want the full unedited version.
And I noticed when I first started doing press that I always felt burned when someone just quoted one or two things, or quoted me out of context, which happens a ton. And you end up feeling like, wait, that was part of a much larger contextualized thought.
Yeah,
what
that
I
must be
said.
awful.
Yeah, but I noticed my favorite bits of press were just like they printed the whole transcript front to back. Mm-hmm. Like, let me be responsible for my words, but also you should show these people like where this came out of. Because you can always pull a quote and out of context and make it sound make the person sound ridiculous, and that's a whole other minefield, navigating, being public, like speaking on record.
Yeah. I can only
we
imagine.
We don't need to get into that.
Yeah.
Boring, but I agree with you that the podcast phenomenon is a welcome one.
Yeah, for sure. I love it. So another thing in your movies that I love is this Trojan horse that you speak of bringing in this deeper spiritual concepts and lessons, but talking about them in this really fun, sometimes really light, interesting story, and it's so beautiful. And there's this one line, and that's what I wanted to talk about in the third act of this podcast anyways, the spiritual stuff. But there's this line that Zac Efron's character says when Jesse runs into him on campus, and he says, "How perfect is the universe?" And so you wrote that line, so I want to know, and I think that you do believe that. And what are some of the synchronicities that have happened in your life that what I call, your happy, thank you, more please moments, when you're just like, more of this, please?
Yeah. Well, again, kind of paradoxically, I believe that and I don't believe that. Mm-hmm. Like, I think the universe does operate according to certain laws, and some of them are in our favor if we're kind of aligned with, what in Asia they'd call the Tao, if you're kind of flowing with the
connected.
That force, right? And if you're not, you're going to get walloped.
Right, depends on the day.
Yeah, I mean, you're going
believe that.
tidal wave's going to come by, but all in the service of kind of getting you back on track. It's like in the Vedic cosmology, they talk about Shiva and Brahma and Vishnu, and Brahma is the kind of unmanifest, like, creative force, and Vishnu is the stabilizing maintenance force, and Shiva is the destructive force. And the way I learned this, and I think this is really sharp, is creativity we should always be creating. We should always be stepping into the unknown. That should be primary in our lives. Then we have maintenance, the Vishnu energy, for things that need to be maintained but aren't necessarily generating newness. And then Shiva, the destructor, which is not a bad thing, it's a necessary thing, will take away irrelevancies. Just naturally, they'll go away. Almost like in a functioning body, the digestive system just works on its own. We don't have to think much about it. But if we get into more of a maintenance thing, where we're just trying to kind of maintain and we're trying not to make things go in any direction, the universe tries to, Shiva, it'll invite more Shiva destructive energy in to move us back to the space of creativity as primary. Does this make sense? Am I explaining?
No, this is great.
So I think that on some level...
Wait, can I see if I'm understanding it properly?
Yeah, please.
So you're saying that when you're out of the flow, it will bring into your life things to kind of get you back into the flow, and when you're in the flow, things to get you to come out of the flow. Things flow.
No, things keep flowing.
Okay. So
I mean, I don't think the universe is a trickster. Like, that's something I had to let go of. Like I really reject the view that it's like a purposeless, lifeless universe where, it's nothing but crazy accidents. I mean, I believe accidents are real, but I think like it's just this unbelievably complex web of, karma and dharma and all these things that are working all at the same time. And I think that, even in the trend in comedy, you see it a lot on Twitter, is like, life's meaningless, we're all going to die, ha ha. And it's like, oof, I just feel like that is it's a dark mindset to get into, because it turns us into victims and it makes us cynical. Mm-hmm. And it's such an ugly thing to feel cynical, because then all you have to do is chase pleasure. Like, that's it, because it's like, the only thing that matters is like alleviating the pain of existence. And that feels really sad and depressing to me.
And then you find you worship all these other things, and then each one you realize it's empty, and then you go to another.
It's a false idol. I mean, I really, in the last couple of years, I started to understand what, like, the first commandment means, like, love God.
Yeah, I heard you talk about this. Is so good.
Yeah. So, do you want me to?
Yes, please.
I mean,
I just got excited.
Yeah, I mean, just this notion that we think that we make God into us. So we say like, oh, God's egotistical. He needs all our love because he's so insecure. But really, when it says love God above all things, means love truth, peace, virtue, like love what God is, your innermost, and love that in your heart. Because anytime you deviate from that and worship something else, whether it's fame or beauty or money or the latest gadget or status or awards, it will reveal itself to be false, and you will have to pay the pain. You'll pay for it in pain if you worship it. So I always say that it's like a metaphor of a really good parent who says, you're in a crowded marketplace and says, hold on to my hand and don't let go, because you'll get lost. Mm-hmm. So it's actually love. Like, it's a commandment about love. It's saying, don't worship anything outside of yourself, outside of your who you truly are, which is me. Yeah.
It's to protect you.
Yeah, it's a protection. It's like saying, like, don't touch that hot stove. Right. You're going to get burned.
That was so helpful for me to hear.
Oh, good.
Yeah, really, really
I think a lot of sacred texts are kind of written in code a little bit. Like Richard Rohr talks about, like, literalism yields the least fruitful meanings from these texts. Like, anytime you're kind of going, oh, that's so stupid, it's like, no, what's it saying? Like, I heard a beautiful, beautiful teaching about Abraham and Isaac, which I never understood, but it's so beautiful, that Abraham is asked to kill Isaac, his son, and it's like, what kind of monster psychopathic God asks that? Like, it made no sense to me for my whole life. And the way I heard it described, which I thought was so beautiful, it said, God loved Abraham so much, but he knew Abraham had Isaac when he was very young. I mean, when Abraham was very old, and he worshipped his son. He had fallen into idolatry. He was absolutely, like, besotted with love for his son, and it was corrupting him. And God loved Abraham so much that rather than do it gradually or teach it, he just knew he had to, like, pluck out this thorn. So he required him to kill him, knowing full well he wasn't really going to kill him. But he needed Abraham to turn over his son, to say, I love you, God, more than my son. And once he agreed to do it, that, the angel Gabriel intercepted and said, no. Now your heart is filled with God, and we will never take your son from you. You can have everything, but your priorities are now correctly aligned. And again, it's not about a gray-bearded, patriarchal, avenging, angry God. That's not the God I think that we're talking about. We're talking about, like, that whisper of quiet, true peace that is within you, that gets crowded out by all the other things of the world. It's what, Jesus talks about being poor in spirit. Like, we should be, the other things of the world should not be, the toys should not be crowding out that thing. It doesn't mean we can't have attachments. It just means, well, I don't know, maybe we can't have attachments. But does that make sense, that story I just told?
Yeah, it hit me hard. It goes right in.
Yeah, good. Good.
Some of those lessons that just, like, go right in. They don't need any, like, filtering,
What I was trying to do in liberal arts with Nat, with the character that Zac Efron played, was I was writing about a place that was very cerebral. And I was also honoring a place in me that's very cerebral, like you, that can be like, a terrible master and a wonderful servant. But Nat, to me, was that part of me and the part of the universe that I always feel like it's trying to get my attention, that is just loving, that is just wants to take risks and talk to people, and has no use for statistics and no use for books, that is really about a kind of heart wisdom rather than a head smarts. So it felt to me that the movie wouldn't be complete without that vision in there.
Yeah.
Where he's just like the little Jiminy Cricket that he keeps into, who is trying to reorient him. And he even does, like, a little weird, I actually thought of this
when he jumps up.
Yeah, when he does the shamanic cleansing on him and literally moves the energy from his head to his chest.
Yeah, and he does that, like, crazy jump up onto both feet at the same time thing.
Yeah, that was Zach. That was his, he was very,
really?
athletic, and he did it once, and I was like, keep doing that. That's so funny.
Yeah, it's so funny.
He started to find, this very physical aspect in that wasn't something I imagined.
Oh, it was so good. It's whenever you even started talking about that character, I just smile. I feel like you can't think about that character or watch that character in the movie without smiling.
Yeah.
Because it's that good part in us. It's that light in me and you that hopefully we can be in enough to communicate from, and it shows that. And I love, that's so cool that that was articulated in the movie through a person. Very cool.
It's both a kind of childlike innocence that we still have in us, but that's kind of atrophied, and it's also you'll notice he's wearing like a Peruvian hat and a Shipibo Indian shirt. Like it's very like kind of indigenous wisdom, or it's like a not Western kind of idea about knowing that nature is alive and that we're that everything we say and do should be from our hearts.
Yeah.
I fail at this all the time. I mean, I'm writing these characters and writing these movies and writing this stuff so I can remind myself that this is my goal. This is aspirational.
Yeah. Which is, I think, why I and people like so many people like me resonate with your movies, because I think it's good to see these aspirational characters. And like you were saying, I want to leave after watching a piece of content or listening to a podcast feeling better or feeling like I'm aspiring to something.
Right. And it's interesting. I mean, I really not fight, but I ask myself, like, where does it tip into utopian thinking or Pollyanna-ish kind of ignorance, where you're not allowing that, what Richard Rohr would call that tragic dimension in. I actually read, let me read you this. Tell me what you think of this, because do you follow Brain Pickings?
Mm-mm.
Maria Popova, I think her name is.
Cool, I'm writing it down.
Totally
sounds
worth
up my alley.
On Twitter, and she does a Sunday newsletter that's really worth reading.
Cool.
Where did I write this down? So she basically compiles all this wisdom from all these beautiful people.
Cool.
And she had a one today about from Erich Fromm, who wrote The Art of Loving. He was a Holocaust survivor and this very deep, beautiful thinker, psychologist. I'm going to read you a little of this, and if this is too long, you feel free to cut it when you edit it. But it's about optimism and pessimism.
Cool.
And he says the attitude of the majority is neither that of faith nor that of despair, but unfortunately that of complete indifference to the future of man. With those who are not entirely indifferent, the attitude is that of optimism or of pessimism. The optimists are the believers in the dogma of the continuous march of progress. They are accustomed to identifying human achievement with technical achievement, human freedom with freedom from direct coercion, and the consumer's freedom to choose between many allegedly different commodities. The dignity, cooperativeness, kindness of the primitive do not impress them. Technical achievement, wealth, toughness do. The optimists live well enough, at least for the moment, and they can afford to be optimists, or at least that is what they think, because they are so alienated that even the threat to the future of their grandchildren does not genuinely affect them. The pessimists are really no different from the optimists. They live just as comfortably and are just as little engaged. The fate of humanity is little their concern as it is the optimists. They do not feel despair. If they did, they would not and could not live as contentedly as they do. And while their pessimism functions largely to protect the pessimists from any inner demand to do something, by projecting the idea that nothing can be done, the optimists defend themselves against the same inner demand by persuading themselves that everything is moving in the right direction anyway, so nothing needs to be done. That's super dense, and feel free again to cut that. But what he did say was, well, she said, what we need in order to transcend this dual hapless helplessness, Fromm argues, is rational faith in man's capacity to extricate himself from what seems the fatal web of circumstances he created. And he calls this humanist radicalism. Humanist radicalism seeks to liberate man from the chains of illusion. It postulates that fundamental changes are necessary, not only in our economic and political structure, but also in our values, in our concept of man's aims, and in our personal conduct. I love that so much, because it's saying, I feel like a lot of people argue, like, if we only change this economically, if we only change this politically, and it's like, no, our values, our concept of man's aims, and in our personal conduct, that's why I'm so obsessive about, like, What are we thinking? What are we saying?
Yeah, going back
What
to
are
your
we doing?
words.
Yeah, like always, because we'll build our house on sand if we don't know who we are and what we're up to, you know?
Yeah.
And then he says to have faith means to dare, to think the unthinkable, yet to act within the limits of the realistically possible. It is the paradoxical hope to expect the Messiah every day, yet not to lose heart when he has not come at the appointed hour. So beautiful. This
Yeah.
hope is not passive and it is not patient. On the contrary, it is impatient and active, looking for every possibility of action within the realm of real possibilities. And then he says, the situation of mankind today is too serious to permit us to listen to the demagogues, least of all demagogues who are attracted to destruction, or even to leaders who use only their brains and whose hearts have hardened. Critical and radical thought will only bear fruit when it is blended with the most precious quality man is endowed with, the love of life. And this is, this guy's a Holocaust survivor, and I feel like his wisdom is incredibly hard-earned in that he saw man at his best and worst, truly. I mean, the absolute extremes. So, I don't know that I can call myself an optimist anymore or a pessimist. Certainly I'm not a pessimist, but, I'm a little more like Winston Churchill. Like he said, there's no sense in not being an optimist. Like it's actually a kind of, I just contradicted myself, but I really believe this notion of kind of hoping to, expecting the Messiah every day and not losing heart when they don't come at the appointed hour. Like I think I just read this today. So this is a new kind of thing I'm throwing into the hopper here.
Well, it's kind of like what we were talking about before at the beginning about thinking two things at once. Two things can be true at once. And it changes every day, and we're constantly changing all of this.
Yeah. But the thing that I feel like the biggest battle is against cynicism. Because that renders us immobile. Actually, she said, Maria Popova said, cynicism is so seductive in our present culture, and she called it a particularly pernicious form of defeatist resignation masquerading as empowered critical thinking. I think that's so good. Because the cynic can really flatter themselves that like, no, only I'm seeing clearly.
Right.
And it's like, well, from one perspective, I suppose, but it's also lazy thinking from another angle.
Yeah. This is kind of related to this and kind of about what we were talking about before too. And I really want your opinion on this because I really take the approach of, we are what we pretend to be. It's like my favorite Kurt Vonnegut quote, it's essentially like fake it till you make it. And I've really tried to do that with my beliefs and what I believe about the universe and God and religion and all of it. And I find what concepts make me feel good and bring me peace, kind of like what we were talking about with finding mentors. And I cling to those, and I think in a healthy way, because I want to believe that so much because I know it makes me feel good. But then also, there's this spectrum of like, if Woody Allen's on one end of like no belief in any sort of universal force, and then there's, a whole other end. And I think I'm still trying to deprogram or like lift off all the Velcro I picked up from my childhood relationship with religion of this, God from this very black and white perspective that we were talking about before. And so my question to you, because I really resonate with how you feel about the universe being this good force, that we can send gratitude towards and communicate with and can attract things to us. And like we were talking about kind of with all of this conversation, but if I'm being fully honest with myself and if I really allow myself to be aware of how I actually feel and not just how I want to believe, I find that like I'm steeping myself with people like you who have these beliefs that I want to have, but essentially there's like somewhere in the back of my mind like, yeah, but remember what you learned in like 6th grade Catholic school, or like whatever. It's like still in there, and I just want to like get some tweezers and like pluck it out. And so my question to you is like, did you when you were trying to construct this belief that you have that the universe is conspiring in our favor, did you always have that? Did you question it? Did it take time to get you to where you are? How do you maintain it? All of that.
Well, that's an amazing question, and I like the honesty in it that you're revealing. And I'm going to be honest in return, which is I don't know that that's my philosophy. Like, and I don't mean to disappoint you, and I hope you still love the movie. And I again, like you, I would prefer to believe the universe is good, but I also feel like there's cruelty here, and I don't believe the cruelty is divinely ordered. I believe that we are the authors of it. I also believe that love is not only sweetness; it can also be severity, and that sometimes we're getting like a really strong course correction from Shiva, who's still a force of God, you know. Mm-hmm. That destruction, that destroying of that which is irrelevant,
to take us onto a new path.
Yeah, know? Exactly. Like sometimes we refused our. You know, David Foster Wallace has this great thing. He said, "Everything I've ever let go of has claw marks on it." You know, like we cling to these things, and I don't know that I have a worldview that is like rock solid and unshakable and like this is what I believe, because I also think that's a danger. You know, that there are people with like really lousy philosophies that won't budge from them, and I don't want to be one of those people. I think there's a my mom used to she used to teach parenting, and she always had this great metaphor for parenting where she said it's like holding a wet bar of soap. If you hold it too tight, it
flies out. Oh, that's so good.
If you don't hold it enough, it flies out of your hands. So you've got to find that like sweet spot of like how.
Man.
And I think that that's true for beliefs, right? Like,
yeah.
Like I'm open to being wrong, but there are certain things that I simply don't believe, and there are other things that I half believe, and there are other things I pretty much fully believe, but there's a little 1% of doubt. You know what I mean? So I just think there's certain like questions you can ask yourself, like my friend Trent and I always talk about being scientists. Like everyone's so obsessed with like scientists say this, right? Like science says. And we put all this faith in the temple of science, but we refuse to really be scientists of ourselves, like use ourselves as both we're the scientist and we're the experiment. So, you know, like I did enough research to know that like alcohol is not good in my life. It's just not good in my life. It just takes me into places I don't want to be. It makes me feel strange. It encourages behavior that's not good for me and other people. But I can read a bazillion articles that tell you a glass of wine a day is good for you. 2 glasses of wine a day are good for you. It's not good for me, you know?
Yeah.
So I think we have to like, you know, not listen sometimes to the mob and say, well, what is good for me? Like being kind makes me feel good. Being unkind makes me feel bad. I don't need any laboratory tests to prove that. Right? Mm-hmm. So that to me is where a truth starts to become a truth. Like it stops becoming a theory and it starts to solidify into a truth. Now, should I always be kind in every situation? No, sometimes you need to get out of a situation. And sometimes that maybe looks not like kindness, but you're ultimately, you know, protecting yourself. So I think you're right to isolate what do you think are healthy worldviews and say, well, I would like to encourage more of this in my life.
Yeah, more please.
And then live, you know, see how that feels. But you can never stop self-observing. I mean, self-observation is the key to any true spiritual practice, because you're having to look at what's mad and crazy within you, and you're having to look at where you had some victories that day. But you have to look internally, and most of us look outside and we're like, if only those people would change. Mm-hmm. You know, there's I always quote this Thomas Merton quote where he says, you know, hate injustice, hate war, hate greed, but hate them in yourself, not in other people. We always think everyone else is the warmonger, everyone else is the blamer, everyone else is, but it's like,
they're just mirrors.
Yeah, but it's so silly. They just have, you just haven't, that all that is evidence that you like haven't looked all that deeply at yourself. Because if you really look all that deeply at yourself, you're going to see that you are as craven and as greedy and as, but even if it's in seed form, it doesn't mean it's expressed. And maybe you hated those things about other people, so you denied them in yourself, but they're there.
Yeah.
It's treacherous stuff. Like I had a teacher once who said, spiritual work doesn't make you crazy. It just makes you realize how crazy you've always been.
Yeah.
Because you'll really start to look.
Yeah. I talk about that a lot with journaling. It's like there's that analogy of like pushing the beach ball down. If you keep pushing it down, it's going to make this like huge splash when it comes up. But if you just let it out and just are honest, at least first with yourself, it's, it comes out more gracefully.
Yeah,
so I think,
yeah. I also think there's something to be said for this notion of, have you ever heard the phrase "be the Buddha before you're the Buddha"? Is like, act like you're the Buddha before you're the Buddha. Like, don't wait to be enlightened under the tree. Like, literally study the Buddha. What did the Buddha talk about? What was the Buddha's like? Okay, so he said, desire causes suffering. Okay, so I need to work on desire. Like actually try to be the thing. So if you study the qualities of what maybe you could call like divine virtues, it's like patience, humility, diligence, temperance, charity, forgiveness, mercy, compassion, like all these things that we say, those are divine qualities. If you start to, even though you might not believe there is a God, or you might not believe that the universe is good, do an experiment and say like, well, if I live those qualities, my life gets better and the lives around me are improved.
Yeah, and I have examples. I just need to like you were saying, remind myself of those. Put those somewhere in my mind to remember on days when I forget or moments when I forget.
Right. But sometimes it's just like doing the action of it. Like if you don't believe it in that moment, just taking the action. Like it's so silly that how many times I have to be reminded, like helping another person will make me feel better.
Yeah.
Like in not being so, I think one of my defects is like, I'm very covetous of my time. Like, no, I didn't have my time with my caffeine and my writing. Like, who cares? Like, you'll get it tomorrow. Like, be of service, And I look, I'm sure from my movies and from my writing, you like you said, like, how did you get to this like permanent philosophy? And I'm just saying, like, it's not permanent. Like, it's a struggle every day to stay on the side of the virtue and the goodness. But I also know that,
good to hear.
Yeah, I also know that I have more wind at my sails when I do.
Yeah.
My friend Dion said this great thing. He said, I don't know if there's a God. I just know that when I act like there is, my life is a lot better.
Oh, Dion, that is good.
It's really good.
So good. Yeah, it's true. I was thinking the same thing. Like when I'm connected, when I'm plugged in, when I'm in the flow, everything's amazing, And it's just about being able to come back quicker.
Right. And I think also, even when you're plugged in and stuff gets not amazing, you have much better tools to deal with it.
Yeah.
Because there's an acceptance of the fact that, okay, this is happening. The worst thing to do is be like, I don't want this to happen. And you're living in this kind of gripped, shut down, like, I don't want this to happen. But if the first thing is like, okay, this is happening, now we're going to deal with it. Like that's also being in the flow,
Yeah. Oh, this is so good. So I really want to get to my quick fire questions that I ask everyone. I already am like thinking about talking about using your time. Thank you so much for.
Oh no! I didn't say that.
Oh no! I know you didn't. Didn't. But I'm just like, I want to be able to be present in the conversation. But I'm also like, oh man, it's going by so quickly.
I have time if you want to.
Okay, cool. Well, before that, I was hoping we could talk a little bit about your spiritual practice and your meditation practice, because my last guest on was from the David Lynch Foundation, and we talked about TM because I started TM in November, and really, really game changer for me. So I would love, how did you come to meditation? I think you said you've been doing it for like over 10 years. Can you talk to us about your meditation practice? And
I think I learned in 2004, so it's been about 12 years. And I remember I had this girlfriend who I really adored, but she battled anxiety, and I remember at one day I was just like, "You need to meditate," and I was really obnoxious
Did
about it.
you
I was like,
meditate then?
"No,
Oh.
no, this is like a perfect example of like finger pointing."
Yeah.
I remember saying like, "You really should meditate." It didn't even occur to me that I should meditate.
Oh, this is so funny. This is so exactly what we were talking about before.
Yeah. It's delusional. But about a year later, I did start meditating. It was kind of like, I knew this woman who said, next time this guy's in town, you got to promise me you'll learn from him. And I did. He taught TM. He called it Vedic meditation, but it's TM. So I got my mantra and I started off, and I got really serious about it. And it was through that. I think I was attracted to meditation initially for like anxiety relief or like wanting to quiet the chatter in my head. And I just thought, well, maybe I could be more effective if I wasn't so prone to overanalysis and neurotic thought. But the upshot was, he would talk about things like enlightenment, and he taught the Vedas, and I started studying Eastern thought. And I always thought enlightenment was something that was like this myth, or I didn't think it was like an actual physical process that we're wired for. And I'm not claiming that I'm anywhere near it, but I do now believe it's a real thing. With I don't know that it's a kind of permanent beatific state where you're just glowing all the time, but I do think that there are people that have certainly raised their consciousness beyond a certain level and are not they don't get tossed on the high seas of life the way we do. And so I started to take that very seriously. And then I had this other level of stuff that started to happen where I got on a TV show that got really popular, and it made me really depressed rather than taking away all my problems. It kind of, as I said in my ink talk, it like poured fertilizer.
Which is amazing.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, it's great.
Poured fertilizer on my defects. So like then I had to get really serious. And then I, found a teacher in a community that was like, and other authors, I really do believe the right books and the right teachers, if you're open, they kind of come your way at the right time. And so I just really started to get much deeper, and my spiritual thinking and has evolved and continues to evolve. But I've read a lot of Buddhist stuff. I've read a lot of Vedas, the Vedas and the Upanishads and the mystic Christianity, like Meister Eckhart and Thomas Kepsis and all these. And then I have a very strong Jewish background, so I really feel like I've become like syncretic in the best possible way. That I've tried to look at the elephant from lots of different angles, rather than thinking that one tradition can give it all to me.
Yeah.
And I spent a lot of time with indigenous cultures in South America, and just getting more of a
collage.
Like really painting with like a lot of different colors. And that to me has been really beautiful, because I don't know that one tradition has it all. I mean, there's so many beautiful ways of looking at this stuff.
Yeah. Have you read the book Devotion by Danny Shapiro?
No.
It's this memoir-ish situation, and it really helped me a lot. I read it my freshman year of college, just like by the pool one summer. But essentially she's kind of saying what you're saying now, where it hit me for the first time that you can really create your own religion, and you can curate your own, take a little bit from this and a little bit from that. And it's kind of like Eat, Pray, Love in a way, where she meets a rabbi, and then she meets a meditation teacher, and she meets a yogi and maybe a priest or something. And she gets I haven't read it in a long time, but she gets a lot of information from all of them, and it's all good, and it's all helpful. And, she has a son, and she's trying to figure out, how she's going to raise this other human being that she just brought into the world. And anyway, it was the first time where I was really like, oh, I can take bits and pieces from lots of different things, and that's okay. I don't have to be all in on one thing for it to work.
And that I think is, to bring it all back, but like, that's very second half of life, which is like you honor other traditions, and you draw wisdom from and solace from a lot of different places. Whereas the first half of life would be very like, you're either this or you're plunged into the abyss.
Yeah, that black and white thinking. Maybe it's just a first act of life situation, and it kind of dissipates.
Yeah. And I still struggle with that because I feel like trapped in between. Like sometimes I do feel like I need to get a little black and white with myself where I say like, you know what, this wouldn't be good for you. I mean, I think that there's a trend in spirituality, certainly in California, that's very like, it's all good, it's all God. And it's like nonsense. Like that is nonsense, like.
What do you mean?
Well, abuse of children is not God.
Right.
You know what I mean? Sexual slavery is not
right.
God.
Obviously, yeah.
So I feel like we have to be careful what we paint with that brush. I mean, I think like I think we are divine in that we are connected to this beautiful, bountiful, ever replenishing source of virtue, and we can bring that more into being in our lives, in internally and externally, or we can not. And a lot of this world is created by the not. So I think it's an interesting moment when you realize like who you are truly and what you're capable of, and you reacquaint yourself with a kind of power that is both yours and not yours, because it's not quite coming from you. But if you can partner with that, like what isn't possible?
Yeah. I feel like I haven't really gotten to the enlightenment parts of TM or from consistently meditating, and TM for me is just like...
I think TM works better as a pressure valve release and a calming of your nervous system so that you can think more clearly. And that's what I think it's wonderful for. I don't know, and I don't want to upset anyone, and I know the good folks at the David Lynch Foundation, I don't know that you could do twice daily TM meditation and that will automatically bring you to the gates of enlightenment.
Yeah.
But that's true. I think there are other factors involved.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like the one thing that it's given me is that it helps me with awareness, which, landing this plane, tying it all up in a bow, it's that getting to know yourself better, which your movies do, which TM does for me. It's helped me. My meditation teacher, I just loved going over to her house for the 3 days, and she was so cool and nice, and we're having dinner next week, she's just a cool person. And she said to me that what TM will do is it helps whoever's doing it become more of themselves. Like Howard Stern becomes more Howard Stern, Josh becomes more Josh. Like, I think that awareness piece, like you were saying, and you articulated so beautifully, is key for all of this,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So this is just like a really granular question with meditation, but do you do it at the same time every morning? And do you do it like in the same spot? And do you use a timer? Like I don't, my teacher told me not to use a timer, but I've really been liking meditating outside. Do you just know when to stop? Have you gotten there?
Well, I do it first thing in the morning. My second meditation, I mean, I sometimes don't tell the TM folks this. I sometimes do TM. I also have another meditation that I do. I always get in a meditation a day.
Yeah.
The second one is a little more variable. I'd say for like a good 9 or 10 years, I was like a twice daily TM meditator. Like I just didn't miss it, Mm-hmm. I mean, I did. I would sometimes miss the second one. The second one's harder to get. I think, 'cause
totally.
It stays up and running.
Right.
But, when I was shooting Happy Thank You More Please, if they were doing a lighting setup, there were a couple times when I grabbed my second meditation. But I also have some really beautiful outside space now at my house where I like to meditate. So sometimes I'll go down there. I've always used a timer, just, the iPhone.
Same. I turn it on airplane mode and just use the timer. Okay, good. I'm glad I'm not the only one. The only meditator that does that.
I was actually... I was taught to use a timer, or even just a glance at the watch, so when the 20 minutes are kind of basically up.
Yeah. Because she told me to look at a clock, have a clock in view, but I've been wanting to meditate outside now that it's been so nice out and doing the timer thing. So anyway, that was just like a totally just wanted to talk to someone else who knows about meditation and curious. Okay, so these are some questions that I ask everyone, so kind of quick fiery, but they might be a little bit long. So we already talked about this a little bit, but you've been a journaler, obviously, for a long time. So is that something that now you're writing lots of different projects, it sounds like, but do you still journal? Is that still part of your life now, of just letting the thoughts in your mind out?
Not entirely. I mean, the book is very first person-y,
Mm-hmm.
so it will function as some sort of heavily curated and labored over journal.
Cool.
Um,
Can you
but
talk about the book a little bit?
it's in some ways like a series of essays that
Oh,
are
cool.
that are
It's okay if you can't.
yeah, yeah. I think it's definitely like it's basically about this podcast, like what how best crystallizing a life philosophy that is both malleable and adaptable, but also something I can really stick with, and how to get better at being myself, I guess, which is the theme of everything
Yeah.
that I'm doing. Um, but I'm not a regular journaler. Sometimes when I am overrun with thought, regret, sadness, even joy, I'll write about it just because I feel like I need. Sometimes I don't know what I'm thinking until I write it, which
Yeah.
is an interesting phenomenon. Like I'll have to see it on the page, and then I'll actually hit on like a sentence or a thought that'll go, "That's it.
Yep.
That's what's going on."
Yeah, Dani Shapiro, that author that I mentioned, she has a quote like that where she says, I don't know what I'm thinking unless I'm writing, and that really, I think I quote that in my book about journaling because it's so true. Sometimes you just need to take inventory of all the stuff that's going on up there.
Yep. Yep.
So another thing that we talk about a lot on this podcast is body image, since that's been my biggest struggle and something that like brought me to a lot of this deeper work. So I know, as an actor, and you said something on Pete's podcast that I really loved, and you probably don't even remember saying it, but you were saying when you were talking about clothes, you were saying you like to try to look the same in everything that you're wearing, but just in
Yeah.
different clothes.
Yeah.
And that really hit me so hard because it was like, yeah, I just want to feel comfortable. And again, that through line that we like keep bringing up today, but more myself. And
Yeah.
is that something that as an actor that you've ever struggled with body image, and how do you take a, bad body image moment and shift out of that to not let it take you out?
Well, I was a very insecure adolescent. Like I was always wondering if I was wearing the wrong thing or saying the wrong thing, obviously. But well, no, it was probably more wearing. But I don't know. Like puberty hit me hard in that I thought I didn't look right, and it was a big struggle early on, especially in college, where I just thought I could be a theater actor, but like no way could the camera get too close on me because I was like, well, my ears are too big, and like I just had a whole list of things that I was too goofy looking or whatever I thought, and I again this is I had like self-image dysmorphia, like it wasn't true. I just was I had bad thinking around it, and I still get hit with it a little bit, but it's gotten so much better, if I can offer any consolation around that. And one of the things that helped me,
Phew.
honestly,
That's good.
was one of the things that really helped me was directing myself, because I had to watch so much footage of myself. And when you're younger and you first hear your voice on a tape recorder and you're like, oh my God, no, that can't be me. That doesn't sound like me. And it's more,
Yeah, I mean, I relate to that just with the podcast because I've
yeah,
had to listen to my voice so much it doesn't bother me to hear it anymore.
yeah, exactly. And it's the same thing with me, where I fully know what my voice sounds like. I know what my face looks like. I know what I look like 360 degrees. And it's not that I mean, sometimes you see a picture and you're like, that's a good picture of me. And sometimes you see a picture and you're like, I hope that never shows up anywhere. But at the same time, it's not that I think I look real good or real bad. I just know what I look like.
Acceptance.
Yeah, I just know what I look like, and it doesn't shatter me when I see myself ever anymore. Like I've accepted that, like, oh, this is what I'm working with, and
Yeah.
it doesn't feel good or bad. It just feels like what it is.
Yeah. This might be
Yep.
really weird, but I feel like the concept of reincarnation really helps me with the body image stuff, because I'm like, this is the body I'm in this time. It might be different next time, it may be different before, but this is what I've got to work with this time. So let's put it to good use.
Yeah. I was actually writing an extended thing. I don't know if it'll end up in the book, but I was writing it for the book about how reincarnation can actually be a strong moral and ethical force in our lives. Like if we realize that, like in the past, we've been everything. Like we've absolutely been every race, socioeconomic class, sexuality, we've been, like, how can we then turn and say, point our fingers at other people? And then the whole notion of like this environmental irresponsibility has so much to do with it. Like, well, I'm not going to be around for it.
Exactly.
Right? But what if we are? Like, what if we're laying the foundation of the world that we'll be returning to? So I really think there's a case to be made for, that we come back. We have to be good stewards of this thing.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So good. I love that. All right. Let's land this plane with some fun quick fire questions. Do you feel good about that?
I feel good about it.
All right. So just say the first thing that comes to your mind. Some of them are longer than others.
I don't know about these.
You've got this. We've warmed up the mics a little bit. We're going to be good. Favorite color?
Blue.
Favorite day of the week?
I think it's Friday.
Favorite hour of the day?
It's become like 8 to 9 in the morning.
Nice. What are your morning routines? Maybe the first 3 things you do when you wake up in the morning and how that impacts the rest of your day. We already talked about one of them.
Meditation, prayer, and on a good day, like just pounding my body and stretching and trying to like move the blood around.
Cool. What's your prayer practice look like?
It kind of changes. I mean, I have a couple prayers I can say, but I try to change them up because I can find myself becoming a little mechanical, like trying to check things off the box. The best prayers
interesting. I find that for sure.
Yeah, the best prayer
for me
is when I really just try to have a conversation and try to. I don't even know who I'm talking to. I mean, I have some sense, but I feel that I'm being heard, and I try to keep it alive and fresh and active.
Yeah, very cool.
And I don't ask for things. I ask for awareness and to turn it over. I don't say like, God, I hope I get this job. Like,
right.
Very
cool. Yeah, it's surrendering.
Yeah, it's the hope.
Yeah. What about in the evening, the last 3 things you do before you go to bed and how you wind down after a day?
I'll sometimes have something hot, like a tea or that calm stuff that I've been drinking. Do you ever drink
yeah, that magnesium stuff?
Yeah. So
good.
I've been doing that. I try to limit my screen time. It doesn't work. So I end up kind of like when I'm in Richmond, my friend is always by his phone. So we like generally when I'm about to go to sleep, I end up having a text conversation with this hilarious friend that I love. And I read, I always read in bed. And again, I pray at night too.
What are you reading right now?
I am reading William Finnegan's surfing memoir called Barbarian Days, which is pretty amazing. I just started Michelle Alexander, is that her name? The new Jim Crow. And I grabbed a C.S. Lewis book called Miracles. I've been very into C.S. Lewis nonfiction lately. He's really something special. And what else? I'm trying to think.
What's one book that you think that, well, I guess you already recommended the Richard Rohr book. Any other books that you think that people should read? Either one that you've read this year that you would recommend or just in general?
I really loved, and I did not grow up Christian, and I am not a Christian, but C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity, I thought, was just this masterpiece of like thought experiments around God and And the Screw Tape Letters, a novel of his, which is like the devil, or one of the like a demon giving his demon nephew advice about how to take this man's soul. It's horrifying and chilling and hilarious. But I'm. Oh, and I also read an essay. I can send you a link to this, but it's called The Inner Ring by C.S. Lewis. I think he's an incredibly morally serious man who is such a good writer and such a thoughtful person. And he was an atheist for most of his, for a large part of his adult life. So it's like he earned what he's saying. He didn't inherit his beliefs. He actually found them to be healing to him.
Oh, that's fascinating. I didn't know that.
As I read it, there's certain things that I have to kind of jump over because I'm going, I don't know about that. Like he says, either Jesus is the Son of God or he's a madman. He can't be anything in between. And I say, okay, I disagree with that. He says he can't just be a good teacher. I'm like, I think he's like maybe the best teacher, but I think he can be a good teacher, So, stuff like that. But my, I was very warmed by that book for some reason. It felt to me like the best kind of nourishing prose.
Cool.
Yeah.
I think you have to really get to a place where you can do that, what you were saying of like skimming over things. I know that I really struggle with that when I am reading a book or I'm following a person's work and I find something that is challenging for me, instead of doing what you did there, being like, well, I'm not quite sure that makes sense for me, and being okay with that. Sometimes I'm like, oh, well, if I don't believe that, then I can't really be in all the rest of the beliefs,
Yeah, but I just feel like, do you ever like go through books and like highlight and underline?
Sure,
like you're not underlining the whole book. You're
right.
Like, to grab what really speaks to you and what you're going to hold on to.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's just like we were talking about before about, curating your own beliefs, curating your own religion. And
I don't mean to be I don't even mean that to sound so wishy-washy. Like I actually believe that there is such a thing as truth, and I believe that there is such a thing as like some things are better for us than other things. Like I actually, in my later years, I've like kind of returned to like standards in some ways. Like I said, I don't believe it's like it's all good. Like I think that we have to be careful about what we allow in, but I do think that we have an internal GPS that can tell us like this is good, this feels right, this feels aligned, this feels true.
Yeah, totally. Okay, later question. What is the best thing that you've eaten in the last week?
Oh my God, there's such good food in Richmond.
Yeah?
There's this Greek restaurant here called Stella's where it's like everything is incredible. We're going to this Italian restaurant tonight where also everything is incredible.
Cool.
In the last week, I'll tell you what I did do. This is going to start. I got a slow cooker.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Like a crock pot?
But I don't know how to cook anything really. But I threw in some like sweet potatoes and some chicken and some onions and some garlic and some olive oil.
Oh, like a stew.
Kind of, but it wasn't even chopped up. It was just like I just threw it all in there and I let it cook for hours and hours. And then my friend and I ate it, and it was so basic, but so delicious.
I love simple food like that.
Yeah. It really felt like what they say, it just preserves all the whatever nutrients. It felt like, oh, everything's in here still. Like it hasn't been drained of its vitality.
Yeah.
So, and there was probably an extra kick to I just cooked this at my house.
Yeah. That always makes
Who needs a dining hall?
Yeah. You've got a friend, you've got good food. That's all you need.
That's right.
So you've got great taste in music. You're a great music curator. So I'll link your Spotify playlist here, but is there something that you've been listening to in the last week or months that you think other people should be listening to that you can recommend?
Yes. There's an album that Ben Lee turned me on to. It's very good for writing because I try to find writing that is writing music is like, for me, I can't have words, so I listen to a lot of classical music. But there's a violinist named Daniel Hope, and the album is called Spheres, Spheres. And he's do you know Max Richter?
No, but
Amazing German composer.
I think I listened to this album randomly the other day.
Oh, really?
It's just so funny and random.
It has like Philip Glass and Arvo Part and
Yeah.
it's so beautiful, this
It's on
record.
Spotify.
It's really haunting. Yeah. So I've been listening to that, and it's totally worth a listen.
Oh, so good. My friend actually, just before we got on this call, she's finishing a cookbook, and she tweeted, who has good writing music? Something not depressing, but without words and whatever.
Yeah.
And this will be
another really nice one is Olafur Arnalds, Arnalds. I think he's Norwegian or Danish or something. But the album is called The Chopin Project, and it's just his riffs on Chopin music. It's very beautiful. Oh, and another one is Max Richter's recomposition of the Four Seasons. Is worth a listen.
Cool.
Oh, and one more.
I'm loving this.
My friend Carenza Peacock is a genius violinist, and she did an album with a guy named Oliver Davis called Flight. That is extraordinary.
All right. Well, Jess, who's probably listening,
I gave her 4 albums.
Yeah, we're gonna finish this cookbook.
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, so another thing that I've been curious about lately, and I've been really feeling like a jack of all trades, master of none, since I have so many ideas and projects in my mind and podcasts I want to start and different things like that. And so how do you feel about starting lots of projects? I guess you've been an actor and known you were going to be an actor since you were very young, so that's kind of different. But what do you say about when you have that feeling? Do you have any advice there about focus or any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do actually, and this was a real gift to me a couple of years ago. But I had a therapist years ago who specialized in highly creative personalities, and he said one of the features of a highly creative person is that you start more things than you can finish. And he said, I said, "Oh, I'm starting too many things," and he said, "I'd encourage you to start more things." He said, "You want to keep the ground fertile, and what will grow will grow." But he said, don't be afraid of starting things like keep it going. You know, sometimes an idea is just like manure that fertilizes the ground, and out of that something wonderful grows up. But it's kind of like keep it all in play. You know, I have 30 pages of a screenplay. I have 10 pages of a screenplay. I have a short story. I have a list of titles that I love. I have ideas that are just always floating around in some form of, and I think that's okay because I actually do get stuff done, and the stuff that wants to get done will get done.
Up.
Yeah.
So you're telling me that I'm okay.
Yeah, you're more than okay. You're a highly creative personality.
Amazing. Okay, well, check that off the list. Don't have to worry about that.
Well, yeah.
All right. So you're having a dinner party, kind of like the dining hall, and you can invite 5 people. What would you cook for them? Who would you invite? And what do you hope someone turns and asks you about at the table? And what do you hope no one asks you about that you're just over talking about?
Oh my God. I might not be able to do this one.
That's okay.
It's a lot. That's a lot. I wish. Can I think about this?
Yes. Next podcast.
Next
podcast.
Okay. It's so too much pressure for this moment.
Yeah, and we've been. You're probably like, I don't want to talk to them about anything because I've been talking for 2 hours. All right, just a couple more. So, what is the biggest lesson you've learned about fame, relationships, and family? So you can do those 3 separately.
Well, fame, I would say that people should watch my Inc. talk.
Yes, I'll link to that.
Generally
that's what I figured.
So we can link to that. Relationships.
Just want to hit all the Josh Radnor notes while I've
got
you here.
Relationships. You know, I'm really not a relationship expert, and I say that with, you know, some humor and some sense of heaviness. but you know, I think my meditation teacher years ago said, relationships succeed or fail to the extent that each person can surrender their preferences.
Ooh.
So
that's another one that goes right in.
Yeah, so I think it has something to do with like encouraging a kind of ego death through another person, which is why we start to resent people, because the ego doesn't want to die. But I also think, you know, the only relationship that I'm interested in these days is the kind where we're each supporting our getting into contact with that God place in us, that true space.
Yeah.
Anything else feels to me like a bit of a time waster. I know that sounds, they can be fun and you can whatever, but ultimately, maybe it's my age or something. But like I know what I feel is the most important thing, and I know that the right partner for both of them can be kind of a jet fuel for that thing, and so that would be what I'm interested in. And I don't know if that's something I had to learn, certainly. And I there are certain things I can speak of with authority, and I don't know that. And it's funny because I write mostly about relationships, but I think being a friend with a sense of humor who can also really encourage the best in you, that feels like ideal.
Yeah.
Family is
well said.
Yeah, family. We all have karma around our family. That's why they're there. And but I also, I heard something about if you grew up in a relatively happy family, you have to invent reasons to get angry at your parents, so you'll leave the house. So we kind of demonize them a little bit.
That's interesting.
But I know a lot of people had deeply, deeply, deeply dysfunctional, unhappy family situations, and I think maybe the idea of family should be broadened. I think one of the reasons I always said one of the reasons people liked How I Met Your Mother was because it was about family.
Yes.
It was about people who had dysfunctional families and found a family in each other. They created their own family. So, I think maybe just widening the definition of family. But I also the older I've gotten, I've really honored my parents for their commitment to each other, for being faithful to each other, for caring about us, so much. Like there's a lot of sturdy lessons that I kind of took for granted, and now that I'm older, I kind of look back on them and say, hey, that was really good. Like I'm really glad that I didn't come from a family that was like, yeah, go out and drink all you want, and you don't have to call if you're going to be late. Like I came from they fretted over me in a sweet way, and I knew that I was loved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's funny. I had a conversation with Val on the podcast, actually, Pete's girlfriend, and we were talking about parents and family kind of like this, and saying how kids can either be sometimes people stop their own personal growth and just have kids, and that becomes their surrogate growth, and then another thing happens when the kids grow up where you can watch the parents, and Val and I were saying we're the same age, and that's happening with both of us, where we are watching our parents grow by us growing and them meeting us where we're at because they love us. And I think that's just this really beautiful thing that happens for adult children and parents relationships.
Yeah. I've engaged in a similar process with my parents, and it is quite lovely.
Yeah, it's super cool.
Yeah.
All right, so let's land this plane. This has been so amazing. First of all, thank you so much for your time and coming on this podcast. And like I said, your work is really meaningful for me. I can't wait for your new book. It's going to be great. And last question that I ask everyone, and then you can just share anything that you want to share. But my old blog was called The Wellness Wonderland. So when I offer a term like that to you, to live in a wellness wonderland, what comes up? What does that mean to you in this moment right now?
Well, first, let me say thanks so much for having me on. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I also thanks for writing about me in your book. It's such a lovely tribute.
Aww.
And I had to figure out as I went, like, why I'm doing this, like what really matters to me. That kind of notion of like why you started acting is not why you stayed acting, and why.
Yeah.
And my films were really well received at Sundance and at other festivals, and then because of the economics of the film industry and all this, they didn't like light the box office on fire. But I always had this sense that the right people would find them, like that they emitted some sort of frequency that people would pass them on and talk about them, and that seems to be what's happened. And I'm so grateful that they landed on you and have provided you.
Yeah, I'm like your brand ambassador.
No, I hear that, but it also, like, you're cool, so it makes me feel like, well, the people that I wanted to hear them are hearing them. And I feel sometimes like, well, if you don't like my films, like, that's totally fine. I just think, like, we probably wouldn't like each other, because I'm really trying to make like my favorite films, and they're issues I really care about. So I just want to thank you for like being an ambassador, for loving them, for being vocal about them. It really means a lot to me. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I tell you a funny story about how I found your movie or something about that really quick?
Sure, yeah.
So I watched your movie with, somehow, I don't even know how we found it, but my college boyfriend like found the movie. I became obsessed with it. I was like, this is the best movie I've ever seen. And it almost became a joke. We would quote the line in the movie where they're at the party and he's like, dude, you can have like 10 cookies. It's a party. For whatever reason, that line just became like the quotable one to me. Yeah. And my friends made me they redid the cover of they like took out your cover of the DVD and remade this cover that just had a bunch of cookies on it and then put the movie like in a big plate of cookies, and they're for my birthday, and they're like, dude, it's a party, you can have like 10 cookies. And it was just anyway, so that's amazing. Yeah, so I just had to tell you that because I'm talking to you and I would be mad if I didn't tell you. So
yeah it's both movies, I'm trying to make my favorite movie. Like, what would be the movie if I like stumbled across it? I would be just delighted because I would feel like someone was talking to me and for me. And they're personal movies, which makes the stakes higher because I'm not making like something that I don't care about. I'm making something I really care about. But I don't know how to do it any other way. You know what I mean? Like, it would feel like, why would I want to spend 2 years on something that I don't feel like is a true offering from my heart, So I guess that leads into your final question, which is kind of, I realize that like the most important things to me are inspiration, both inspiring people and being inspired. And I just feel really, really, really grateful that I get to live a creative life, that I get to make my living creating things. And it's not something I take for granted. I mean, I take a lot for granted in my life, but not that. And so to just continue to have health and resources to keep making things and sharing stories and connecting with people who connect with those stories, and also connecting with other people's stories, and having a creative community and breaking down walls and barriers through art feels to me like the one of the most exciting things. Yeah.
Josh, you hit all the notes with that one. That was amazing. We got community, we got all of it. I feel like, do you feel like creativity to me is like this collage of all of these things that are meaningful and then putting them in a package that you can do in that moment, which, at one point was Happy Thank You More Please, and then liberal arts, and then, the book, and then all the things that I create. I feel like it's kind of like taking our greatest hits or the greatest things that we've gleaned in some way and putting them in a package for people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I always think of what I'm writing in that moment as like a receptacle for like anything that happens in my day, in my mind, in my heart, like. And a quote I hear, like, everything is usable when something is being written. Yeah. And when I look back on it, it really does function as this kind of journal or this document of, like, not literally, but I think of Happy Thank You More Please as my 20s movie, and I think of liberal arts as my 30s movie. Because the issues, even though they were only made 2 years apart, like, the issues of the first one are really... that was stuff I was struggling with in my 20s, and in my 30s, absolutely, that's what liberal arts is. So, but again, there are visions of like, I present the problem and then I, do my best to like heal something of it, know.
And that's Chekhov's why there's, What did you say?
I was going to say that Chekhov, the playwright, said that the artist's job is not solving problems, but properly presenting them. Ooh. But I also feel like there is something like, sometimes like a wiser version of me is at play. And in my writing, I can actually access that. And that's why there's so much mentorship, because it's like, I know what to tell myself, kind of like what I saw in my journals when I was a young actor. So I think, you can step out ahead of where you are almost in life and offer yourself some wisdom from some different part of you that's not fully accessed or materialized. It's a slightly mysterious process. That's why I always think creativity is like, it has magic about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's mystical, and that makes it so cool. Well, I hope you never stop creating. I really like your stuff. It's very meaningful to me, and I'm so glad that I got to hang out with you today. This was great. I hope we stay in touch and I get to talk to you again.
Absolutely. And I felt a little sleepy at the beginning of this. If you want to edit this, I kind of felt like I perked up and kind of got... But you can do whatever you want with this. But it was great to talk to you.
Thank you so much. It was amazing, and I feel like I was so worried that I was taking too much of your time, that I was like in my head a lot about that. And so thank you for spending so much time and letting me ask lots of questions and talk about my feelings, and just, yeah, it was so cool. And I'm so grateful to know you and be your friend now. And yeah, this is great. So thank you again.
Absolutely.
Thanks, and I really do think you should start a podcast.
Well, I got to figure out some time for it, but I do. I would love it, and I like talking.
Well, you have a built-in audience, because people are like tweeting at somebody literally today, which is so goofy that I was interviewing you, sent me an Instagram of like, hey, I got that movie you always mention. Like, I made it. And I was like, this other guy made it, but thank you. So anyway, I really am your brand ambassador. It's silly at this point.
I love it.
Well, have a great dinner. Hopefully you're not late, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Katie.
All right, that was it. My conversation with Josh Radnor. I hope you enjoyed listening to this as much as I enjoyed recording it. Again, thank you for listening to give me the opportunity to be able to record it. You guys are so awesome. If you're still listening right now, please let me know what you think. Tweet at me, tweet at Josh. He's very active on Twitter. And let us know that you're still listening right now, that you heard this episode, what you thought of it, what you got from it. If you want to hear more, let me know. And as always, subscribe, share it, keep in touch. I think you guys are so awesome. And I will talk to you next week. Love you. Bye.